The world being described is a place where elves lived long, peaceful lives. When they were hungry, the elves simply picked fruit, but they hunted only to practice archery. They spoke with spirits and pondered the truths of the world, and the elves' days passed calm and measured. Lying on a branch and chewing an apple, the heroine Iser, a highborn elf who had already lived 1,000 years, longed to taste meat and felt an urge to set out on a journey to find inspiration. At 30, he realized it, and 120 years later, he felt bored. After swallowing the last bite of the apple, Iser saw the wind spirits in front of him. The protagonist realized he was completely fed up with elven life. It was clearly not his calling. Reborn with memories of his past life and knowledge of the world, rich in cultural achievements, he realized this world desperately lacked new experiences and vivid stimulation. High elves loved the forest and lived in its embrace, unaware of the cares and troubles of the outside world. High elves lived for more than 1,000 years. When their bodies faded, their souls turned into spirits that stayed part of the natural world until the end of time. He had lived that way for over 100 years, but he felt he would soon reach his limit. Glancing at the sparrow that flew up to him, he hinted he was already tired of this fruit. The sparrow flew off from Elfen at once, and he thought the bird must be clever. The hero decided he would not live like that for another 100 years. Living until the end of the world was too long and too hard a trial. I wanted so badly to see, try, and feel many more things, and only after I'd had my fill of life become a spirit or someone else. Cutting his long hair and tidying the new cut, he noticed it immediately lifted his mood. The elf forests rose into a vast sea of tall trees called the plough. No one yet knew what lay beyond the elf lands. Iser packed several backpacks to prepare for the journey. He had no one here to say goodbye to before leaving. Kiro believed that if someone important was meant to appear on his path, fate would bring them together again. And before leaving, the boy checked his belongings one more time, hid his bow and arrows in a woven ivy pouch, packed his food carefully, and took a stone knife with him. 2 weeks had passed since the hero left the forest, and when he crossed the magic barrier, the outside world filled him with wonder. But barely had he started down the river path when a forest wolf attacked. Satisfied with the prize, the boy pictured how to use the forest wolf's claws and fangs. Large fangs could be turned into a dagger or knife, and the smaller ones strung on a cord to make a necklace. But first, he decided to find an experienced person who could teach him how to prepare and make useful items. Stepping onto the plain, he found a boundless horizon opening in every direction. The beauty of the view filled him with awe. Walking down the slope, he believed an endless world lay before him. Heading for the nearest town, the soldier thought he would be among people for the first time. They told him he had to pay a toll to enter. Entry costs 20 copper coins with an ID or 1 silver coin without it. He explained he needed money to move on, but the boy's puzzled face made him doubt the boy even knew what money was. The hero understood exactly what it was and what it meant, but he had no money, so he only lowered his head in shame. The soldier looked at the young man with sympathy and asked if he knew anyone in town. If he did, they could ask for help, borrow money now, and pay it back later. He did not want to agree to it, but suggested asking to buy the fangs of a forest wolf. While they talked with the guard, a group of people suddenly appeared behind them. One of the girls in the group called to Ace and asked him to come over for a moment. She grabbed the elf's hand and, before he could recover, pulled him aside. Turning, the girl looked carefully at Ace. The boy whispered, asking if he really was a high elf. To ordinary elves, high elves always seem to glow with bright light, and that glow could not be hidden because it came from their immortal soul. Realizing he could not hide it, he just nodded in agreement. If it was not a problem for him, the girl would like to hear in his own words what brought such an unusual person to the city of humans. He said he was bored living in the forest, so he decided to see the world, and the girl looked at him with obvious distrust. He asked her to call him Eyes, the name he had in the remote woods, but she still watched him with the same suspicious expression, likely thinking him odd. Her face kept changing, as if she had lived among humans too long. Iser realized she was not just a child. Elves change when they enter the outside world. After a moment's thought, the girl turned to the boy. Admitting it would be rude to ask a high elf, she said she could gladly help him through her connections. Smiling, he thanked her for the help, since that was all he needed. She was genuinely surprised by the reply. Bending down, she kissed the hero's hand to thank him, full of admiration and eager for their next meeting. The young man felt awkward because he thought he should have offered his hand first. Although he genuinely appreciated her help, once they reached the town, he was already eager to part ways. She put her hand to her chest and said the young 6-star mage called White Lake vouches for Isasami and will also pay the entrance fee. The group explained to Isasami that 6-star is the title given to an experienced adventurer. The ranking system was aimed at newcomers, and the top rank was 7th with 7 stars. There were few such teams nationwide, but 6-star groups were regarded as the best in Vistacor. At last, the young man was very pleased with himself, and Iser clapped in approval. Meanwhile, the girl had already planned the next few weeks with the soldier who had invited Iser to join them. The children welcomed the boy and said he could enter the city whenever he liked, but warned that if he caused any trouble, the person who vouched for him would be held responsible. The rules were simple: don't steal, don't buy weapons from private sellers, and the like. Anyone who stayed in town for a long time had to pay a tax for staying. Iser read the rules carefully and knew he had to be cautious. After reading all the terms, everyone had to sign the document to show their agreement. Seeing the young man's name, Walter introduced himself as Rodner from Garth House, patted him on the back, and assured him he could always turn to him for help. A young man opens the door for a group of guys and warmly welcomes them to Vista Court. It was the first time the boy had seen a real city, and he was filled with wonder. As he looked around, the girl in the group asked whether he had any plans for the future. He had no plans. The girl suggested he register as an adventurer to get an ID. After thinking about her advice, he had a more important task to carry out for now. To process the materials taken from the forest wolf, he needed to reach the right place and asked the guys where the nearest suitable spot was. Noticeably upset, the young man admitted that the best goods in town were in the gnome shop and asked if the hero had anything he could sell to ordinary elves. I remembered the legends about gnomes in elven mythology. They said the dwarves once stole a spark of fire from nature itself and locked it in a forge. In any case, elves and dwarves never got along, and Irina was right. The gnomes would probably refuse to sell them anything. Still, the hero wanted to see the dwarves if his friends did not object. Even if Iron did not like it, the boy just wanted to know where their workshop was. I was surprised when he said he didn't hate the gnomes, since he'd never met them, and it would be strange to hate them. He hated metal objects and gnomes because the forest trees feared the metal items gnomes made. You were too naive, so the man assumed they simply hated him. Wanting to stay at a hotel but having no money, he asked the girl to buy something from his belongings. Holding out the fruit, he told the girl it had once been used to make an elixir of youth, so it might still help her. Unexpectedly, the hero gives her a pile of bullets, stunning the girl. The elves loved that fruit, and because Aaron had helped her enter the city, she was expected to accept the gift. He handed her another fruit to show his gratitude and sincerely thanked her for her help. She stared at the boy without moving, but the hero still didn't understand what was happening to them, insisting that those fruits not be shown to anyone. For no reason, she promised that first thing in the morning she would explain everything about money and the value of human life. She insisted they would go to the blacksmith only after they settled all those matters and made sure I understood her. The hero realized there was no other choice and was ready to learn everything he needed from thin air. This morning, the protagonist arrived at the forge and stepped inside to greet the owners. He stepped inside, but the forge was empty. Apparently, the blacksmith was very busy. While looking over the different weapons that immediately caught his eye, the hero did not notice the blacksmith step out of the next room and, apologizing for the delay, greet the guest. The gnome wiped sweat from his brow, praised the boy for his good taste, but added that he had items of much better quality. As soon as the hero turned to the gnome immediately saw he was an elf and sharply demanded to know why he had come to his shop. He declared he would not sell anything to the cursed elves. Deciding to greet the gnome with a smile, he called him by the same name the man had used before. Scanning the weapons, he admitted they were excellent, but said he had not come to buy anything. Having already chosen the material for his knife, he apologized and handed the gnome a prepared note naming the material. With an angry look, he stared at the man and recalled how the man had insulted him earlier. Yet he still enjoyed spending time with the children because until then he had believed elves only knew how to choose drinks. Relaxing slightly, he let go of the rope holding Ace. He wanted to know why the hero had come to him, and whether it was for some foolish reason, and if so, he was ready to give him a proper beating. The hero showed the gnome the wolf's fang he had taken in the forest, and asked him to forge a knife from it because he did not want the material to go to waste after killing the wolf himself. They told him he was wrong. It was not the fang of an alpha wolf, but of a much larger creature, the great wolf. Beginners should not take on such a task, because a few tricks are not enough, and it requires skill and experience. Lacking a knife, he didn't dare take any hide or meat with him because he had only fangs and claws. Sighing deeply, he said that in that case he could help him learn to use the fang. And if Iser is strong enough, he can earn a living as an adventurer. He offered to forge a weapon for me, but I just shook my head and refused. He said he was not ready to leave adventure behind and wanted not only a knife, but other items made from tusks and claws. And longing to see the next piece, he even wanted to be a blacksmith for 10 or 20 years because the craft had captured him. And the dwarf fell silent in deep surprise at the confession. Clutching his head, he thought the boy was not just a simpleton, but a true, eccentric elf, and decided it was better to deal with an oddball than with an arrogant upstart. He was glad when the gnome agreed to teach him blacksmithing. After all, it would be a shame if his wonderful great will fang were left idle. Even if someone doesn't understand your path, sooner or later, it will cross paths with someone else. Izaha reached out to the gnome, offering to work together. The gnome, eyeing the laboratory warily, still hesitated to trust him. The blacksmith realized the elf would not back down and shook his hand. Learning what had happened to Ace, the girl and the rest of the group grabbed their heads in shock. It still made no sense to her why Iser was forced to work at Gnome's shop herself. He didn't understand what she meant. Working for Koval would mean being paid by him. Now, Arena stopped at an inn. Not a simple one, but a truly luxurious hotel. Imagining the traveler's arrival, he couldn't stop drooling as his mind filled with thoughts of bread, with the rich scent of wheat, and a juicy, fragrant steak. He said he couldn't do it now, but he wanted to be independent one day and return all the money to Aaron. The girl seemed confused and said it wasn't about that. She warned that a smell of iron on him would scare the trees, and the spirits could not tolerate it. The thought of what would happen if his spirit left him was unbearable. He insisted she was wrong. The spirits would not hate her just because she smelled of metal. Trees don't like being cut down with an axe, but they are too weak to resist. Some incidents saw spirits angered by contamination caused by mineral poisoning. When the elves learned this, they decided the spirits must hate metal and quickly spread the rumor. The main character was sure that placing a potted plant next to the baby would make the baby and the plant friends. He asked the teacher for permission to bring the plant here. The dwarf only glanced at him in silence and sighed deeply. The young man took that as silent consent and understood he could act as he wished, so he could keep watching the plant. He really wanted to tell the girl about the spirits, but while she was here, he still hoped to sell her something. So he showed her the rifles and offered her those chickens for sale. He assured us the item was really high quality because a gnome made it, and buying it supports a good cause, so we thought Iser would not be angry with it. Smiling, he joked that he would be seriously angry if she treated him carelessly, but if she treated him with care, he would not mind. Isis noticed something the girl had missed and politely repeated her question to the seller while trying to buy that night. Promised to take care of him. From the sidelines, the dwarf knew that no axe like that could erase the old feud between elves and dwarves. A hero sold a high-quality weapon to a seasoned adventurer. That was enough to keep them satisfied. After waving goodbye to the girl, I moved on. A year has passed since the hero settled in this town. When equipment upgrades became available, more customers came to the shop and the staff grew. The hero learned how to forge nails. Back then, metal goods were in short supply, making villagers' lives much harder. The smithy's neighbors became true friends to them. Iser brought the teacher many requests from the locals, who asked for at least some nails, not to mention cauldrons or knives. Seeing the elf drew more visitors, he suggested the elf try managing it himself. Meanwhile, the master was ready to teach the new apprentice blacksmithing, putting nails where eyes should be suited him. Orders increased, and his pay went up, but Aaron still covered most of the living expenses. She taught him to value money because a single night cost him about 5,000 yen. She also paid the boy for the lesson and for what he had learned about the spirits. The hero hesitated, but took the money when she insisted. Later, Iser complained about it to the soldier, Rodner, which made him laugh until he cried. At the bar, the men sat with drinks, and Dinus realized she had once vouched for him, so she could not abandon him under any circumstances. The hero was about to leave the inn yard. Rodnus offered to help him find a safe spot so Aaron could calm down a bit. The hero thought about his meeting with Aaron, the dwarf teacher, and Rodnus. At the same time, he felt incredible happiness that these people had come into his life. The squad left on a long assignment, so the young man decided to discuss it with her as soon as she returned. Martin's girl from the Ernest team rushed into the forge. A young man greeted her with a smile, but she looked upset. Her eyes showed anxiety. Turning to the hero, she asked him to help stop the mad spirit because they needed his strength. The boy looked at the teacher, and the gnome let him go. The girl gripped the hero's hand and urged him to hurry. Rose arrived at the hotel, and the girl admitted it was a long, complicated story. This matter was clearly unpleasant. A request came from the city of Galarot over 2 weeks ago, and that is quite a distance, and it was addressed not to their White Lake group, but directly to Elfan Dukavidis's representative. Vest had to lift the curse from a humanoid water spirit that had poisoned the river water in the city of Galarit. The townspeople quickly realized someone had angered the water spirit, and people began falling ill in large numbers as the city's water turned poisonous to everyone. At the same time, many fish in the river died, while the surrounding plants remained unharmed. The water spirit could not poison the water it lived in. The hero realized the problem was not a curse, but real pollution. Galarot was a new town, founded after ore was found here 10 years earlier. The damage from pollution caused by the ore harbor was simply blamed on a made-up, angry spirit. Galarot's owner probably should have thought about who he was dealing with. I told him that this lord came from a new noble family, was passionate about developing intellectual abilities, and enjoyed great trust from the king himself. The girls didn't know what to do next. Perhaps the lord had already understood the reason and put the blame on someone else, or perhaps he didn't even suspect this problem with the people around them. The memories of what followed brought tears to the girls' eyes. Aaron went to the scene and did everything she could to calm the angry spirit threatening the city, while Cree stayed behind to protect everyone if danger arose. Meanwhile, Aaron hurried back for help and took it all in. Despite the difficult circumstances, he steadily grew into a spirit witch, and that could be seen as a kind of blessing. Ultimately, Aaron could have easily completed the task if she had followed the requirements. If the water environment were destroyed, and the space would become much larger than a single room. In that case, your spirit would no longer be able to influence this world. He grasped the heart of the problem and immediately began to solve it. Aaron treated the spirit as a friend, not an enemy. Always ready to help, he told Martina they would need help from someone else. They had worked with metals for a long time, so they were well aware of the dangers those metals could pose. They advised him to seek help from his mentor at the dome. After hearing their story, the blacksmith hesitated a moment, then said he understood exactly what they meant. If the blacksmith's guild opened an investigation, the king himself would certainly learn the results. I did not expect the blacksmith to take on the investigation so quickly, so it surprised us. I just suggested introducing them to someone from the Alliance, and that was all, because without the gnome teacher, the shop will remain closed for a long time. He replied that if an ordinary guild blacksmith conducts the investigation, the information probably will not reach the king, but if a well-known master does it, the king will have to intervene. Their influence in the kingdom was great, and many were members of powerful local alliances. Not a single dwarf would listen to talk about acceptance by the elves. They exchanged a look, and suddenly, for some unknown reason, burst into laughter, but the gnomes still did not understand what was funny. After that, everything was simple. As staff of the place, they genuinely cared about everything happening here. They thought that closing the mine and gallaret would push metal prices up right away, and that opening another deposit would spark a wave of opposition to its development. This was a serious problem for them, so they asked the heroes to be careful on the road. Dwarf bowed to the women who stayed at the forge and told the heroes to go to the capital first to try to form an alliance. Convinced his gnome mentor would take care of everything, they set off for the city of Gallaret. Bordeaux climbed into the carriage, and Iser remembered that he was a high elf living among humans, so he had to act like a true high elf. The group reached the camp where Kreus from the team was already waiting. Kreus warmed himself by the fire, looking rather gloomy, with dark circles under his eyes and hollow cheeks. Seeing Martin, Kreus genuinely brightened. He thanked heaven for being here and seemed to have some position in this place. An impenetrable fog wrapped the forest. When a person stepped into it, the mist thickened and turned into water on windows and in pipes, slowly flooding them. Martin's runs back and forth lasted almost a minute. Once the air comes back, they'll head to a safer place. It's clearly unsafe for people to stay here. Kiro said goodbye to everyone and set off to find the arena, sincerely apologizing for being late. Turning, Anna saw Iser in front of her. Iser was surprised by how far Anna had come in such a short time and felt proud to call her an acquaintance. Beside the noble Isak, Aaron could not hold back tears. Isak begged him to come back, but the hero told her everything was under control and asked her to trust him with the rest. Since she paid all his living expenses, he had to work to earn the money back. Wiping her tears, The girl heard the boy say the team was already waiting, so she could go back to them. Having become an immortal spirit, the high elf stood almost on equal terms with them. An elf like Eren could only obey the spirit and had no way to resist it. He decided it was time to take part in the events, so he turned to the spirit that lived in those enchanted springs to find out what had angered it. Angry, the girl looked at the elf and began to tell her story. Long ago, people lived here who truly respected nature, and they honored not only the land, but also the spring's spirit, which they raised to the status of a deity. These lands were taken, and the survivors had to adapt to a new culture, yet in their hearts, they never abandoned their faith. They firmly opposed the mining project, so they were forced to leave the area. The spirit could not intervene without a direct request, but the tribe deliberately refused to involve it in the dispute. Meanwhile, the fish were dying in large numbers, and the water kept growing dirtier, so the spirit decided on its own to drive the newcomers out of these lands. She acted for herself, her loved ones, and the earth, so pollution could not keep destroying everything around without consequences. The child appeared before her, and everything fell into place. The spirit decided that for this girl and the world she lives in, evil must be destroyed once and for all. He noticed things were going badly because the spirit had already made up her mind. Understanding her feelings, he tried to steer events to his advantage like a swift current and assured her he understood her anger. In carrying out her plan, she realized the wave of anger would sweep away not only the guilty, but also innocent people acting with sincere intentions who could not grasp the true nature of the world, and she had no right to direct her anger at them. This was especially true for the children. The local kids were almost no different from the ones she had once loved so tenderly. After thoughtlessly wiping it all away, she could no longer be the spirit people revered. With tears in her eyes, she remembered those who had thanked her for the gift that brought them prosperity and happiness. With Is already working to clean the pollution, the hero earnestly hoped the water spirit would not unleash its wrath on those who did not deserve it. The city of Galerit was saved. The gnome instructor announced that the blacksmith's guild is already working to fix the problem at the mine. From now on, any work that requires their approval. The true cause of the incident is now public. The mayor was held responsible for the problems with the clever woman and removed from office. The eviction of the local residents was cancelled. The hero sincerely hoped they could return and live here without fear. Later, the former lord took his own life in his bathroom. The king who had appointed him also drowned in his own bathtub 3 days later. Lord Bora held a grudge against the king, and people said he sacrificed his own life to place a curse on the monarch. The truth is still hidden in the dark depths. A few years after Iser began learning blacksmithing, he learned the basics and started making weapons and armor. Around that time, an acquaintance showed up. A young man apologized and said he wanted to buy the mace, asked if there was armor to match it, and hinted he was ready to spend a whole pouch of coins. Ace's mace caught his eye. If he could wield it well with one hand, a shield would be a great addition to his gear. Leather boots would help him keep his balance. He smiled, thinking he was not that weak after all, and could become a true traveler. If things go well, he will earn money and return to buy even better gear. Once that happens, he can choose his own work again, exactly what the hero wants, and now feels determined and inspired. Finally, the store said goodbye to the hero, who was impatiently waiting for their next meeting. The boy worked hard at the forge and eventually forged a bow by hand that never missed the target, and when his hair grew back, Eren gladly trimmed it. His tasks were varied, from repairing armor damaged by giant monsters to meeting a baby. 10 years had passed since Iser began training as a blacksmith. One day, his mentor told him news that stunned him. The master gnome got married, and the blacksmith reminded him about his bride, so the hero was invited to take over the family business. The hero asked how old the dwarf was, and the blacksmith was surprised it took him this long to ask. The dwarf was already 90 years old, which for dwarves is like 25 to 30 human years. It was hard for the hero to picture, and it only made him more curious. The gnome tapped the boy lightly on the head and joked that one day he too would have to think about his future. Clutching his head, he realized it would still take a long time. In the past decade, the teacher has taken many students under his wing. Many of these apprentices are already skilled enough to open their own shops. So if the gnome teacher leaves the forge, his students will make up for his loss to the world of smithing. The seed I had tended so carefully for so long has grown into a magnificent tree. Unfortunately, to learn from the gnome now, you had to already be a skilled blacksmith. When the hero first met him, he did not know this and behaved rather carelessly. The gnome took that as arrogance, because an absolute beginner could not become his apprentice. After that, the gnome agreed to take the boy as an apprentice, and the boy felt a real bond with him. Feeling inspired, the boy dared to ask who the lucky girl the gnome had mentioned was. The gnome replied that it was rather bold to ask such questions while he was holding a cleaver. Over the past decade, more than just who became blacksmiths has changed. The band White Lake rose to fame, earned 7-star status, but broke up 3 years ago. Eventually, Cryas and Martin Priestess got married. They left the peak of their careers tired but hopeful about raising a new generation of adventurers. And the hero always insisted it was the best possible decision. Leaving the city to meet new friends, she said her real adventures were only beginning and that her journey was far from over. Smiling, she said goodbye to the hero, but could not resist giving a few last pieces of advice. Her instructions were so plentiful that he felt like he was facing a caring mother. She stressed he was now fully independent and reminded him that the town still had many people and many things to remember and watch for. So he should take care of himself and stay alert for unexpected events. The first person the hero met in this town was the soldier Rodner. Later, he was promoted to captain of the guard. One day, Rodner came by and suggested they have a drink. Many years had passed, but they still often met him at the local diner to exchange a few words over a mug. The same young shopkeeper, who later became a distinguished warrior, visited Mr. Iser. The young man proudly told Mr. Iser he had raised his rank to 5 stars and now had a good chance to reach the White Lake level. A great fighter and clearly a talented adventurer, he received the elf's sincere congratulations. Over the past 10 years, the young man went through so much that the previous century and a half of his life faded in comparison, and nothing before matched what he had experienced. Nature asked the hero what he planned to do after returning to the dwarven kingdom, and he paused for a moment, then said he wanted to master swordsmanship and learn magic. He wanted to find places in the capital where he could learn this if he had enough money. And the dwarf sat on a stool and realized his spiritual power was also a kind of magic. A faint smile crossed his face as he noted that the boy, as always, remained a mystery. Then he decided to leave, adding that Ace could do as he wished. He was surprised when the gnome called him by name. The blacksmith looked down and admitted the gnome had truly been his best apprentice and would always be his friend. Unable to hold back, he laughed, as that smile did not suit a gnome at all and did not look like him. Laughing until he cried, the hero said that a tall elf like him would hardly ever visit the dwarves' kingdom. So Oswald remained only his mentor, smiled warmly, and reminded him that despite everything he was a friend he would never forget. When the gnome squeezed the boy's hand, laughter slowly turned into real tears. The gnome asked him to restrain himself, since he was the best among them, not like how he was now. As the blacksmith would say, to lift Iser's spirits, he playfully punched him in the stomach. Then he asked for another 50 years and promised to visit the dwarves' kingdom afterward. She smiled and reminded him that he is the best blacksmith in the whole country, so he will surely become king. When he takes the throne, he will let the elves visit them any time, and when the icy... For gnomes, smithing was everything. Mastering it let them reach any summit, and even earn a crown. The hero could not allow himself to relax, so he decided to keep improving, even if it was only a small step forward. The master left the forge in the care of one of his apprentices, and Iser used it briefly to forge a knife. He got an official blacksmith certificate, though he literally had to wrench it from the guildmaster's hands. The smiths were stunned that an elf was allowed the license, and he even had to fend off a persistent gnome. And in the end, Iser added the long-awaited license and a knife forged from a wolf's jaw to his pack. Iser left town and ate a fruit before the trip. The journey to the capital took about 10 days, and walking would take even longer. When he got the chance, he set out on foot, lost in memories of the last decade. That is how the hero reached the capital. Iser finally arrived at the capital of the kingdom of Lundria, the city of Vorfel, and was captivated by its grandeur. On entering the town, the townspeople immediately recognized the elf blacksmith who lived among humans and assumed he had come to study swordplay and magic. His status was fairly high. The registration clerk apologized for his carelessness, but said the heroes had been acting rather oddly. Arriving in the capital, he first bought some food. The capital Vorfel sits in the heart of the kingdom of Ludria. That is unsurprising, but unlike Vista Corte, it is much busier and more pleasant. The city also has many schools and training academies for aspiring swordsmen. This city has 3 main schools of swordsmanship, known collectively as the 3 disciplines. Ludrian was a measured sword and shield style common among soldiers and nobles. The hero did not find it remarkable. It also allowed using the sword with both hands, a technique he remembered well because it let one not only strike with the blade, but also butt an enemy with the body or kick. Cryas had used a similar method before. The final style was the greatest and focused entirely on absolute defense. It allowed one to completely restrain an opponent, and the hero knew that style was not for him. The hero remembered hearing about another style long ago, but was sure it had died out because no one wanted to study it. Zero wondered which style would suit him best. Street performers on the sidewalk suddenly caught his eye. A dark-haired girl at the center of the performance caught his eye as she skillfully performed sword tricks. With a single expert stroke of her sword, she split the apple on the table in half. The cut looked impossibly perfect, and he couldn't explain how she had made such a clean slice when the sword was clearly not dull. The sight made him admire the perfection of her movements. The hero moved closer to the girl who was wiping her blades. Placing a silver coin on the table before the surprised girl, he said her skill could steal his heart and that he sincerely wanted to become her apprentice. Fachi misunderstood him and asked again. Iser Bud said he would pay for the training and do any work. The hero begged her again and again, never losing hope. She blushed, unsure what to say, and the boy admitted he had never heard of the style she was learning. That did not bother him. He was determined to master this style. Agreeing, she offered to take him to her dojo, but was sure that once he saw everything for himself, he would change his mind. The young man froze when the girl led him to a half-ruined building. This was the once famous Yasogi Rai dojo, where one of the 4 martial arts was taught. A Lordran warrior defeated the school's head, Although the duel used fake weapons, the blow was so strong it caused a death. Most students wanted revenge, but fierce arguments broke out over who should be the new leader. The planned revenge was never carried out, and the dojo never recovered from those events. Her mother was ignored and left to fend for herself, sparking an inner warts that finally ended what Yasugi Raya once was. He didn't understand what she meant, so the girl explained that the style was now meant only for show, not for fighting, and it was all she had left from her father's lessons, the technique she had created and refined under his guidance. Their style could draw unwanted attention from the Lodran school, so the girl told Isu to act alone. He stopped her and told her everything was fine. The style she showed was exactly what he wanted to learn. He had no idea how strong Lodran's students were and felt no fear, doubting many of them would be worthy of real admiration. Before they started, the hero asked to borrow her sword for a week to train with it, since, in his current state, he could not match her level in a duel. The girl looked at him in surprise and asked who he was. He said he is a top-level alphaviz, skilled in archery and spirit summoning, and a licensed advanced-class blacksmith, and he would like to be the first student at the Rai Rabornia Sogi school if she does not object. A woman appeared behind them and noticed guests had arrived. They told the woman that starting today, Iser would officially work for them and live in the guest room. Iser greeted her, and they both looked at Kina in surprise. Tension rose quickly. Tina's mother had a chest illness, so the hero went into the forest and gathered healing herbs for her, then offered a puya fruit that restored her strength. To earn money for her mother's medicine, she performed on the street. Seeing this, the hero decided to help her save time and money. The medicine he prepared was not only effective, but also surprisingly tasty. In his free time, he began visiting the blacksmith's guild, where everyone was surprised to see an elf with such a high rank as a master. Carefully working on Kina's sword as if it were his own, he soon began taking other commissions. He realized he needed to make connections here because they could help him later. Back at the dojo, he deliberately started conversations with passers-by and spread rumors that an elf had joined the Asogi River School, knowing such news would draw everyone outraged by the idea of reviving the fourth discipline like moths to a light. Any danger to either of the two could ruin his training, and whether or not he had a duty to protect them, he acted as he thought best. But now the hero had no time left to study magic, so that would have to wait for several more decades. Meanwhile, Cray received a reply to his letter. He wanted to keep the Lawland students from getting too curious, so he asked an ex-member of the Star Seven to scare them. The man agreed politely to help. Cree asked to be put in charge of all matters related to Lordran School. He wanted to be told about any events first, even before the school building was destroyed. He wrote that he would send a letter right away and would be in Warfel very soon, so they could meet him in person and set a time. Ace didn't know who they took him for and decided not to push it. A dispute with the Asagi school began back when he was just starting his adventures and still a student at the Lauderdale school. Iser imagined how Kina and her mother would react when Krios showed up here, and he thought about how people relate to one another. They were fragile and difficult in relationships. Hai understood why elves preferred to live as recluses and knew he could be too pushy. Kira wanted to talk to people, seeing nothing in life sweeter than Akina's smile. Training finally began, but it was very simple. Training focused on drilling the strikes, and the boy carefully repeated every move Kina made. She had never taught anyone before, so it seemed the only natural choice. Usually, those things aren't explained to newcomers, but for her, it was different. The training felt like a forge where he hammered metal. Step by step, he made changes in different places, as if he had all the time in the world. 6 months into his training, Cry appeared among them. Before arriving at the dojo, the boy trained at the lauded school and took lessons from Kena. Because Kreia was under a mentor's supervision, the boy decided to stand behind Kreia. Finally, he saw himself as a true, cool adventurer, and the girls were impressed when Kreia bowed to them and sincerely apologized on behalf of his companions, who were deeply sorry for the trouble they caused. They saw a brave warrior in Cry, so they offered him a place to stay for the night in the guest room. The hostess was delighted by the idea, and Kina asked him to tell her about the art of fencing. One day, the girl approached Sakurai because she had an important question for him. She challenged him to a duel, and the young man gladly accepted. Eventually, it became clear that Kina was powerless against him and had to admit defeat, which deeply upset her mother. Kreia had to admit that her sword skills were lacking, and the real world became a harsh test and a valuable learning experience for her. What he had in abundance, others did not need. Pharaoh thought it was nothing special, and he was just moving calmly and steadily toward his goal. If Kina's sword skill was imperfect, he judged his own to be the same. She suggested he join her as a companion on adventures for 2 or 3 years. She assured that the strongest man she knew would be by her side the whole time, and pointed to her eyes. During practice, she noticed he kept helping her and repeatedly did kind things. Her mother's tears. If they could forgive her, she would ask him for one more favor, since she was about to become an adventurer. With a sincere plea, she asked him to look after her mother while she was away. The hero realized the path of the sword is unique for everyone and set 2 conditions, the first being that before she left, he wanted to make her armor himself. Kina had to set up the headquarters in his house on Worcester Court. Surprised to find he actually owned a home, she realized it quickly while he treated her as a simple, slightly naive girl. Kina lived in her own house, and her acquaintances could watch over her. Various neighbors and colleagues moved in nearby, including a priestess of the Vista Court Church and a fencing instructor from the Adventurers Guild. The young man hoped that, even while adjusting to her new life, she would keep training and toughen her character. They wondered whether Arena felt the same. She shook the hero's hand and promised to become a swordswoman worthy of being his mentor. She simply asked him to wait a moment, and Iser readily agreed. With Kino gone, the hero renovated the dojo and trained alone, tirelessly honing his skills through solitary practice. Always by Kina's mother's side, he stayed to protect her. Beside the dojo, he built a forge where he worked. Kina left while the dojo was still being destroyed, so she never saw how it looked after it was rebuilt. Since starting his apprenticeship, his skill as a blacksmith has grown a lot. He even asked permission to enter a contest to present his work to the king. Last year he finished 3rd, and this year he moved up to 2nd. Only the gnomes finished ahead of him. Maybe that is why aristocrats and bullies often picked on him. Orders for swords and invitations to their estates and banquets stopped once they realized he was more stubborn than the dwarves. Since then, the nobles left him alone, and Iser sincerely thanked his spirits for helping drive away the unwanted guests. They summoned the hero and told him that a letter addressed to him had arrived from the keeper of the key. "I intend to read it. I will definitely read the letter. I cannot hold back. I must find out what it says." I wondered what was in the letter this time, and the boy guessed she had been promoted again. She earned 4 stars in her first year and 5 in her second, advancing remarkably fast for a loner. She worried she had taken on too much in such a short time, but knew Kreia was watching her closely. Her adventure experience pushed her skills to improve remarkably fast. I was a little annoyed that Kreia would be the first to see it, and I even felt jealous. At that exact moment, she sneezed loudly, drawing everyone's attention to her. Reading the letter, The woman's face lit up with surprise, and Ace watched her with interest. Winning 6 stars was only the beginning. She promised she would be home very soon, and her mother wiped away her tears. After 3 years apart, he finally got to see her again, and the thought of his teacher's return crossed his mind. Waiting for his teacher to return, he was called. They told the tired young man that dinner was on the table. A lot has changed since they got that letter. Delighted that her daughter would be home soon, she cooked a lot of food every day. As always, before they began to eat, the boy prayed and wished her a good meal. Not wanting any of it to go to waste, he ate every last crumb. The boy hoped Kina would get back home soon, and his stomach felt the same. While enjoying his rice, the hero spotted a ghost at the entrance, apologized quickly, and ran off. He watched the entrance in silence, as if waiting for someone. Within moments, a woman appeared in the doorway with a mysterious smile. She instantly swung her sword at the hero, who managed to raise his weapon in defense. And at that moment, he could be sure of only one thing. 3 years of training paid off, and even after a single blow broke it, his sword still protected its owner. In just 3 years, this plant bloomed into an extraordinarily beautiful flower, and the sales rose in tribute. A surprise greeted the hero when another figure appeared at the doorstep and, smiling, said it had been a long time since they last saw each other. Smiling at Arena, who lowered her head when she saw Ace. At last, she had to ask him for help. The thought made her blush and feel embarrassed. The guy was right. Some time passed, and that day she decided to ask her Ace for help. Krya introduced her to Kina, so Kina could take her to him. Meanwhile, Kina noticed they had a new dojo. Half of the captured elves included a girl who pleaded for help with her eyes. This was roughly her story. Ludrian nobles captured elves in large numbers and turned them into slaves, likely to win glory and praise. The hero could hardly believe that an ordinary person had so easily captured elves. After all, the elves he knew were either forced to work as mercenaries or lived alone in remote forests. The elves living beyond the great sea of the forest were by nature peaceful and did not make a habit of fighting. Talking to spirits is one thing, but using that skill in battle is another. So humans would be unlikely to conquer the elves by military force alone. These nobles used their own troops to raid elven settlements and lands. The settlements were well hidden, and most people did not even know they existed. They blinded the elves on purpose and kept them constantly drugged so they were completely disoriented and could not contact the spirits. Cut off from the spirits, the elves could only turn to humans to fill their inner emptiness. People treated them almost like animals. Not a submissive people, the elves still stood out for their unusual beauty. He couldn't understand why everyone wanted a slave, but he clearly saw why elves inspired such admiration and were valued above all. The country's most powerful aristocrats were behind this and controlled the entire eastern region. The royal authority clearly knew but did not intervene. The girl was convinced that punishing such important state figures would be far too difficult. Secretly owning elf slaves became an increasingly prestigious status symbol among the nobility. In reality, the nobles could legalize elf slavery at any time. Simply freeing the captive elves in secret would not have changed anything. Those nobles who started this injustice had to be exposed and punished, and the kingdom had to apologize for its crimes. Aaron's help and strength were needed not only by him, but also by others. Without action, their pain would fade from memory over generations. So the elves had to be rescued to prevent the same suffering. He said this pain must be uprooted from the kingdom itself. Anger should be shown openly, so Iser was ready to move mountains for it. And Erna promised that during the mission, She would free the imprisoned elves and, if things went to plan, persuade all the elves in the country to leave the forest and move to a safer place. The elves lived in forests ruled by a powerful natural force. If they left, chaotic monsters would take over the land, soon fill the whole forest, and break out beyond it. That is why the elves were desperate not to leave their homeland. Guy promised he could convince them to move if things got really bad. Aaron fell to her knees and, with tears in her eyes, asked for forgiveness. Understanding Irina perfectly, he gently asked her to lift her head. He knew that if things went that far, he could no longer live in this country. She regretted that her action would affect the fate of all the elves, including him. She thought it wasn't her fault. She asked him to stop and reminded him she still hadn't taught him anything. She agreed to take him on as an apprentice so he could help treat her mother. She was still grateful to him for those 3 years. After all this time, she felt she had not done anything to repay him. She lowered her head and started to cry, but the boy just smiled and told the owner it was nothing. His eyes still held the memory of your blow as bright as daylight, and it had already given him a new guide he could keep following. Auro asked others not to say she had taught him nothing or done nothing good for him. Iser realized she had actually done far more for him than he had for her. That was not enough for her. He wanted her to keep following her path and to pass it on to her students or maybe to her child. And even if it takes decades and she is no longer nearby, he will still keep learning from whoever inherits her sword. Irina still sat across from them with her head bowed and said nothing. She apologized to both him and Kina, but never revealed her true intentions to her. With a firm grip on the heroine's hand, she promised to lift her sword higher to hand it down to the next generation. The girl reminded him she was still his mentor and asked him to return to her while she was still alive. Let go of her hand and smile. She stood before him, her blade still burning in his eyes and her words echoing in his heart. Looking at the smiling girl, the young man realized he was truly happy. In the heart of eastern Ludria, among the generous forests that cover the Marquis's lands, there once stood an elven settlement that was destroyed by the Marquis's personal troops. Preparation took 6 months. I felt deep regret for all the elves who had to endure slavery during that time. They had to be freed all at once. Otherwise, any traces could become evidence that others could easily destroy later. Facing the mass emigration of elves and starting a search for all the enslaved, they could not act rashly, and everything had to be carefully planned in advance. An arrow was stuck in the nearest tree. The hero kept thinking about the best way to attack the nobility's lands. He considered asking the water spirit for help, but quickly realized it would cause too much destruction and probably not help. The hero considered summoning the fire and wind spirits to create a fire tornado over the aristocrats' lands, but it would kill too many people, still not achieve the goal, and inevitably lead to a large-scale conflict between humans and elves. The hero sought the grandest possible spectacle while keeping destruction to a minimum. So he called on the mighty spirits who guard the land and, bowing before them, lit up with a wondrous light. All his focus went to picturing the nobles' estates in the east. In his mind, the ground barely trembled, first up and down, then shifted slightly side to side, filling everything with a low hum. A hero of old would hardly be threatened by these underground tremors, but for people facing them for the first time, they felt like pure terror. And while the nobles remain untouched, ordinary, honest, defenseless people will bear the brunt. The people's horror may soon turn into raw rage, aimed at the nobility blamed for this and at the country that allowed it. But however things turn out, it was the eyes who staged this treacherous game. This push signals the traveling elves to rush to free their captured comrades. Then their forces will begin a mass withdrawal, about 8,000 in total. Hordes of monsters will overrun the forests, and the country will likely have to issue an official apology. Once these apologies become part of history, they will guarantee that such a tragedy does not happen again. The main negotiations had to be with her, since she was the most influential among the adventurers, and Ludria would treat her cautiously, but one worry remained. If any of the rescued elves were children, the tragedy could happen again. Because of their mixed heritage, these elves had poor relations with spirits and different lifespans and growth rates from ordinary elves, so people despised them for the misfortunes they were thought to bring, and buried them immediately after birth. He tried hard to explain that this tradition made no sense, but doubted anyone would listen. So he started thinking he should take care of the half-elves himself. In any case, he could no longer stay in that country. He had completely forgotten that he still had not managed to learn magic there. Warming his hands, he wondered where to go next. He glanced at the blade. The sword's cold glow calmed his restless thoughts. That was all he had gained during his time in Ludrium. His choice had benefits and a cost. For a moment, he let go of his worries and slowly moved his sword through the air. The first time he saw the sea, the hero couldn't contain his joy and jumped as high as he could. The kingdom of Ludria stretched to Polluted and continued south to the Republic of Villastrica, which lay right on the coast. A large country that has achieved major success in sea trade is run by an elected parliament made up only of nobles. Skirmishes often break out along this country's borders with Pavologia, which seeks access to the sea. Ludria sends supplies to support Pavologia, so it has become another state with which Villastrix has had disputes. He noticed the heat was unbearable, and the sun beat down mercilessly. People said Ludria was far richer than Pavologia. Ludwig never imagined that people somewhere might be struggling simply to get drinking water. A happy fate came to the young girl who shared her water with him and to everyone in her village. That was his small promise. On his way here, the hero faced many trials and had many adventures. The villagers wanted to know his name, his age, and where he came from, and also why he had come to the village and how long he planned to stay. A lot happens to Ace and Ludria. He only wanted to find a place where he could live in peace and see something new. Wanting to taste the seafood, he asked the guards where to find a good restaurant. He reassured the man he was not a spy. Besides, the fellow was too conspicuous to be spying on anyone. They went back to their conversation. The hero sincerely apologized to the elf send. The problem was that they ran into trouble with the people from the north, so they had to check where each person was. Welcome to the city of Sarat, where he could find any dish to suit his taste, and locals had even told him the names of a few places. He set out to find a bar with sailors and fresh fish. When he finally arrived, he knew it was the place he'd been searching for. Inside, the hero found a bustle of visitors chatting among themselves. He apologized and politely asked permission to take the empty seat. When the waitress spotted him, her face lit with surprise and joy. An elf visiting their tavern was rare, so she warmly welcomed him and invited him to join them. The young man asked to try their best raw and fried fish and ordered 6 large fried mollusks with a suitable drink to go with the meal. Smiling, the young woman noted the order was quite large, though at first glance she would never have guessed he was such a glutton. She went over to another customer and, joking, told him not to be shy and to speak up if he needed anything. The man smiled back, thinking that this beauty was not the type to hesitate or get lost in a crowd. Apologizing for the delay, she served the boy his dishes: a salad of pink fish with truffle oil and 6 fried shellfish. The dish made his mouth water, so he decided to try the fried shellfish first. Tasting them, a sharp pleasure shot through his whole body, and the elf's ears twitched with delight. It tasted amazing, so he washed everything down with a drink and said it tasted even better. He glanced at the waitress, and she returned his warm smile. They shared amused looks while the waitress carried the hero's next fish dish. A loud crash rang out, and people around began shouting and cursing. Tension rose. One of the men, fed up with endless repetition, lost his temper and hit the man he was talking to square in the face. The blow threw him back, and he crashed straight into the waitress. He ran up and caught the girl before she fell, but his fish flew straight onto the floor, and the waitress and Ace stared in horror at the broken plate with the fish. The man who hit him smugly said that those kinds of guys can only be handled that way, and he walked off satisfied with himself. In response, he got angry and accused him of killing his fish. He ordered the offender to be slapped and to apologize to her. The victim tried to understand what he had done wrong, while the hero ordered him firmly to apologize to the innocent fish. But instead of making peace, they began to fight, and bystanders tried to stop them and urged them to end the quarrel. The cook couldn't help glancing at the two boys kneeling before him as they apologized sincerely. She tried to defend the elven lord who wanted to protect her, but the cook ordered Karina to be quiet. The young man who had fought the elf told the cook he had ruined the elf's day and was to blame for everything. Grant insisted Driss was clearly to blame. He had no idea how much more trouble Driss would cause them. Grant barely managed to stop himself from trying to knock some sense into him. He nearly broke down, insisting it was only the beginning of lies and that this was not food but complete garbage. The hero apologized to him, realizing people can fight over tasty food, and he had no reason to be angry with him. Smiling, he said they had finally come to an understanding. The ruined lunch break still deserved a couple of scoldings. Driss asked how long the hero would stay and offered to catch a whole fish for him. Grant was clearly glad they had patched things up, but asked them to look around, to show him the broken chairs, and said that if they paid for the damage, he would let it go for today. Cook Castle said if they caught fish, they could bring it to him, and he would gladly cook a tasty meal, which led Iser to meet 3 townspeople at once: waitress Karina, fisherman Driss, and tavern owner Grant, whose friendliness and energy reminded him of his gnome teacher and soon put the hero at the center of the town's life. Ace was still bothered and couldn't stop thinking about the man Driss had beaten. That insolent man was so bold he openly insulted his host's food in the tavern. It was strange that such a confident man gave up so quickly. The young man pressed a compress to his bruises and, wincing with pain, sat down. He removed the towel from his hand and checked the wounds carefully. Driss admitted he works for a trading company. The hero realized he needed to be more careful. If this continues, his many wounds could hurt his skill as a blacksmith and his ability to fight. That would be unfair to both Oswald and Kia. A dwarven mentor would likely scold him now for not trying hard enough. Remembering his teachers, the hero climbed into bed and decided he must get up early the next morning. That morning, the hero hurried and hoped Driss would catch him something for breakfast. As he ran to the pier, he saw a noisy crowd gathered around something unusual. Everyone turned to the bully who was trying to leave and firmly told him to go because he had no business here. Hoping they were all right, he asked Driss if everything was fine. He wanted to use the advice he had received the day before, but suddenly felt a hand on his shoulder. The man behind him stepped in and told the elf it did not concern him. A powerful jet of water struck the hero in the back, sending him stumbling backward. He asked them not to touch him because he wanted to talk to Gree, and warned that if they touched him again, the consequences would be worse. Iser thought the local sea spirits were much more aggressive than those he was used to, and since he had not even had a chance to tell them anything, he decided he would stop writing to them so often. Drift shouted angrily that it was all their fault and that they had started it, unable to understand how those scoundrels could oppose him. And Drift and Ace stared in shock at the boy who blamed them for all his troubles. Deliberately provoking Riz to create an excuse, he then volunteered to stop them. Deciding he was too hungry for that, he skillfully dodged an attack from one of the men. A few men had tried to grab them recently, but the hero called on the spirits, who with a single motion swept the attackers into the water. Grizz looked at Ace in surprise and realized how strong he was. He could not understand why the boy let himself be beaten yesterday when he could easily have fought back if he had wanted to. The boy said he did not need help from the spirits in a one-on-one duel. Besides, Drist would not force his friends to fight alone. And he smiles. The man behind him offered to fetch something more interesting and suggested they start immediately, promising to listen carefully to any wish Iser had. The sea god could be capricious, but Iser was determined to do everything he could. After a while, the result appeared. Everyone watched eagerly as the boy tasted the seafood. The food impressed with its tender texture and the drink with its rich flavor. They managed to catch and cook an octopus. The tavern owner began to think that by experimenting, he could make many interesting dishes from octopus and squid. After gathering details at the market, Iso learned about the town's affairs. Merchants came on large ships, while fishermen went out in small boats, and this often led to heated disputes over use of the harbor. Local noble families backed the merchants. The Pacelli family stood out and had fished for many years. The Tritron family owned many trading companies, including Lorette, and they constantly tried to expand their sales outlets in the area. Two families joined forces to make the town better. New people began coming to town to buy goods and groceries. The more they sold, the more the fishermen earned. Relations between them began to deteriorate. Merchant ships with deep drafts needed a deeper harbor. To fit as many fishing boats as possible, the port had to be expanded. Fishing boats were small, so they could tie up right at the shore. Strong sails meant the harbor had to be bigger and located next to the beach. Brodin was not sure whether this was a typical problem for seaside towns, but it seemed to be the main dispute here. Meanwhile, the cook prepared another experimental dish and offered it to try. Driz entered the tavern and announced he had brought another octopus. Among the young fishermen, he was the unofficial leader. She aimed to mock him in front of everyone. Loretta seemed set on humiliating the fisherman that way, but it turned out not to be so simple. Driss was sure the man had already eaten the octopus, but the hero clarified it was only a contest to tear off the tentacles. The trouble was that although the bullying was sometimes truly awful, Iser could not say any of them were completely beyond redemption. Driz hoped the hero would at least enjoy a boiled octopus. Germans and merchants had close ties, but they could not resolve the matter. The hero got an apology letter promising a personal meeting the next day. It was the fourth day he had been in the city. People said the man was cunning and would do anything for his own gain, so the hero ignored the message. He reached the shore and was instantly surrounded by local boys with knives. One looked like he wanted to apologize, but no one really did. Iser called on the spirits of the earth, and sand held the attackers still. The boys stood confused, trying to understand because they could not move. I had only a few seconds to break every sword he was holding. Terror gripped the group and they ran, while Ace called on the earth spirits to grant him one more wish. Those who panicked and tried to flee sank into the sand one by one, and the hero watched with a satisfied smile. 10 people had to be rescued. That did not require sending an entire pack to search for him. The soldiers realized this, They discovered that Lorette had been harassing and tormenting the fishermen. Those criminals were also committing fraud. The laureate had to answer for all his crimes. A trading company tried to kill the traveler, but failed, and since then he has posed a serious threat to the Tretrin family. Not all the town's problems were solved, but while walking the streets, the hero spotted a small gecko on the ground and decided to shelter it and take it to safety. Families let their husbands argue. Such arguments between competing interests ease tension before the situation gets out of hand. Nothing seemed to change, as if everything was following a pre-written script. Ace felt he was being manipulated. At Grant's tavern, he kept enjoying the food and drinks until, after a month, he grew tired of all kinds of seafood. On his last night there, he ordered salted dried tit-meat snacks for the table. The hero clearly enjoyed the dish. Customers ordered the appetizer more often, and more octopus was brought. The tavern was constantly noisy, and Karina happily noticed there had never been so many guests. She suggested they hire new staff, and thought this would let Grand keep expanding the menu and attract even more guests. People assumed the hero was always busy, and the boy said he would leave soon, so he would certainly make her work easier. Throughout his stay in the city, the hero felt someone watching him. Even after they settled matters with Loretto, that feeling did not go away. So two noble families had indeed hired someone to follow him. In fact, Karina had been the one watching, and she seemed to have a whole network of informants across the city. He wasn't sure whether Grant would step in, but he knew Karina would handle Laura. Smiling warmly, she offered the boy some food. Eating it all would mean less work for her. His easy, casual impression of Karina turned out to be surprisingly accurate. All three admitted they would miss him, and the hero promised to visit them sometime. He told her he was leaving the next morning for the northeast to the land of magic. She guessed he meant that small kingdom in the east, and he confirmed it. She waved goodbye, promised they would meet again, and joked that next time he should bring a grocery store with him for work. After saying goodbye, they smiled and gave each other a high five. He believed the city would stay both the same and always changing, at least for now, and he wanted people to miss it. The protagonist's goal is the country of magic. It is one of the small states in the Eastern United Union. This whole region used to be called the Azoid Empire. Later, separate countries and city-states emerged. It all began with a quarrel over an inheritance, and after that, the state lived among the ruins of the past. Eventually, the people declared they would govern the country themselves. Naturally, the city-states did not get along well with each other. Like the other tiny states, they managed to avoid being absorbed by more powerful neighbors, while Alliance A united to resist foreign interference in its affairs. Besides the alliance itself, other rules applied specifically to the land of magic. Passing lush apple orchards, the hero decided to stop for the night under their sheltering shade. Founded to study magic and train powerful mages who can change the course of war alone, this place is fully independent, so no city in the state can take it under its control. The hero wanted to master magic, and the best teachers he could find lived in the land of magic, where he had a real chance to learn it perfectly. A simple trip across the country will satisfy his curiosity, even if he doesn't meet anyone special. While Lisa walked along the path, a cart passed by. An old man stopped and offered her a ride, but she politely declined with a smile. She always preferred walking. Waving him off, he figured he would get motion sickness even in a carriage. A letter from Sorat, delivered by air, told him they were heading there, and if he was near Odin, the boy was almost certain she would find a way to contact him. But unlike in his past life, he could no longer be sure the letter had actually reached her. The hero wondered if the ship would rock him to sleep. A boat trip would be another interesting addition to his already rich travel experience. Seeing the roadside sign, Asen decided to ask Driss at the next opportunity to take him to Sora. Sometime later, the boy reached the town of Jumperman. It looks like a stone Titanic drifting in a sea of gold. In fact, it's just a line from a local poet. Hearing that phrase, the hero felt a new strength and resolve. This time, he decided to use his blacksmith's license to enter. Not planning to stay long here, he wanted to work at the forge again. It had been a long time since he last did that. By concealing his name and earning recognition in the county, he could reduce the guards' scrutiny. Stopping at the inn, he was warmly greeted by a friendly young woman, and after wishing him a good evening, she asked what brought him here. Looking for a room to stay the night, he would not turn down a good meal. She called loudly for her mother to say they had a night guest, added that a private room costs 50 copper coins, dinner is 12, and breakfast 8, and asked the guest's name. When the young man revealed his face, the girl was stunned. Mr. Ice pointed to his room and suggested leaving the suitcase and going downstairs for dinner. Hesitantly, he told Ice that bathing in the laundry would cost 5 coins each. Leading the elf to his room, the girl glanced at Ace out of the corner of her eye, but when she met his gaze, she froze and blushed. Blushing, she asked if the hero was really an elf. Panic flooded her. She quickly muttered that she had no right to trouble the guests with such questions. To her surprise, the hero gently stroked her head. Smiling, he admitted the girl was right. He really was an elf. It was probably her first time meeting an elf, and genuine joy shone in her eyes. She said she saw elves as she walked past them, but none have visited her yet. Use the key to open his room door and remind him not to lose it. Inside, the room was a bit plain, but the bed was worth the price. Neat rows of furniture caught his eye immediately, and he thought he might stay here longer. The local cuisine would, of course, be the deciding factor. The first course was already waiting for the champion. The girl offered the hero wine, wheat bread, and pasta with bacon in a white sauce. Iser was enchanted by the taste. Not a crumb was left, and the girl immediately noticed that he enjoyed the dish very much. Smiling, he said the dish was excellent, and the food exceeded all his expectations, so he will definitely stay at this welcoming place while in town. The hero arrived in the Principality of Trevian at the Jumpam Guild to see the smiths, confirmed with the master that he needed 10 spearheads by a set deadline and offered to pay 1 silver coin for each. He entered the smithy, and the master assured him the hero would find everything he needed here. The owner decided this kind of task could be given to an outsider, and he saw understanding in the other's eyes. The workers inside stared at the elf, since they did not often see such guests in their smithy. His top-level license, issued by Ludria, and even the famous gnome's name meant nothing here. The man showed him a spear as a sample and asked him to make a similar one. Inspecting the spearheads, they found the work quite rough. They had to make 10 of these spears each week, but there was no limit on orders. Believing that improving the design as much as possible would mean few would have to defend against those spears, he accepted the job, and everyone watched the elven blacksmith in surprise. Only the final touches remained, he said. Everyone beside Marble was impressed by his speed and skill. One blacksmith even said his piece surpassed the model. The hero thanked them and promised to return tomorrow to finish what he had started. Riding away, he waved goodbye to the boys while the blacksmiths warned him to be careful on the way back. His heart pounded in his chest. Maybe it was just curiosity, but their approving words felt surprisingly pleasant to him. The gnome teacher's words came back to him as he remembered the surprise that Iser could not form the tip correctly and did not admit it right away. I didn't want to disturb him while he worked, but the gnome got angry and said there was no need to fuss over such a small thing. He believed the sharp-eared man clearly lacked common sense, so he asked him to watch the training closely. He looked up at the starry sky and smiled, remembering Mr. Dwarf, who raised him. But to the elf, their parting from him still felt very recent. The lands where this united alliance stood were very fertile, so the locals lacked nothing. Today, he walked through the town and gave the girl at the tavern a large cake that made her very happy. The girl was off work at the tavern today, so she decided to stroll through town with him after he won her over by promising to treat her to tasty sweets. Embarrassed. A week had passed since he arrived in Jampion, and he still needed a guide. He told the girl to go home before dark, and she agreed without protest. At Vista Court, he worked 6 days and had only 1 day off, so he kept fit and took care of his living situation. After handing in 32 spearheads, he was relieved to learn he had the day off. O'Reilly misunderstood the spear's balance, thinking the weight sat only at the tip. Complaints would change nothing, and a new task awaited him tomorrow. Taking a handkerchief, she gently wiped the girl's dirty nose and softly asked her not to make a mess again. In this fertile country, sweets were not cheap. Andal, though born and raised here, had never tried cakes. He was glad that so many treats still lay ahead to try. For silver coins, they sold dried fruit pies with delicate cream, pancakes generously drizzled with butter, and assorted cookies. His thoughts went back to the days when he had to eat the same thing every day. Now, enjoying this food, he felt his spirit growing stronger. He remembered those lines about the stone titan sailing in a golden sea, and it made him feel a little lighter, though not by much. This was what real human culture looked like. Finally, Iser and the girl ordered a huge cake despite all Nauda's bans. Not everyone welcomed the wealth. The hero overheard people talking about a Drakian army that had invaded northern Zaire, a land of warlike mercenaries called the Lions. The Dradians were a nomadic people with a powerful cavalry, at least as the hero remembered. Non noticed something was wrong with his eyes and asked him about it. Smiling, he reassured her that everything was fine and gave her half his cake. Othod was amused by how she greedily pounced on the cake and nearly swallowed the fork along with it. He decided that if he wanted to learn all the details, it would be better to ask the Blacksmith's Guild representatives about it tomorrow. The Blacksmith's Guild announced today that a gathering of the top masters from Zalioni may take place. Final certainty was still lacking. The Kovals only knew that several northern states of the Eastern United Alliance intended to send aid to North Zaire. He wiped his sweat with a towel and paused briefly. It seemed this did not mean he intended to take part in the war, but a nagging dread stayed with him. Meanwhile, everyone around admired the sword Iso had been working on and praised how beautiful it turned out. The former miss expected him to be a role model and found him too perfect. Iso's next commission after arrowheads was to make the best sword he could, with no limit on cost. The sword's type didn't matter now. The hero examined the blade closely and turned it on its side. His expertise was with straight swords, the one-handed weapon taught at the Shogi Ryo school. While Iser examined the sword, one of the blacksmiths said impatiently that the work was already finished. Deciding to test the sword, he stepped outside and made a few broad swings. One of the blacksmiths offered to join him, but the other just shook his head. Leaving the room, he thought that Shogi Rai training completely focused his mind. The ideal sword was still clear in his mind, with a flawless shape, exact dimensions, and the right weight and balance, so he swung his sword with confidence. Still searching for it, the hero's heart burned with passion. He needed to give at least a partial form to the image forming in his mind. He knew that only 2 of his mentors could truly understand him. That was enough for him, maybe even too much. For everyone else, only the result of his efforts mattered. A faint smile crossed his lips as he decided his weapon would speak for him. At last, his creation was ready. Every day, the hero tirelessly forged the blade of his sword by a blazing fire. Koval was thrilled. They thought his work was amazing. We couldn't imagine how anyone could repeat it. The workday ended. The hero barely made it to the hotel and collapsed exhausted onto the bed. Completely exhausted, he had been working non-stop for almost 3 weeks. He worked without a single day off, steadily perfecting the sword and earning a hefty reward of 10 gold coins. So when 3 days off finally arrived, he planned to do nothing. But as soon as he thought about it, a knock sounded at the door. The nanny called Mr. Iser and offered to bring his food to his room, and the boy agreed, saying it would be great because she always helped him whenever she could. She carried as much water into his room as she could, so it stayed clean and fresh, gave Ace extra portions, and boosted his mood and confidence. These small acts deeply moved him and gave him strength to go on, and Ace knew how much he owed her, so he decided that as soon as this was over, he would invite the nanny to enjoy some sweets together again. He could no longer ask the master gnome to appraise this sword. Iso could do nothing to help, but he felt a slight sadness inside. These two things meant far more to him than gold. Morning came. The girl made sure the hero had not forgotten anything, and as they parted, she promised they would definitely meet again. She smiled to say goodbye and promised they would meet again. Her relaxed, slightly daring manner impressed him so much he wanted to stay at the hotel again. It made him realize Nana had real character. He had stayed at the hotel far longer than he planned. The last 3 days he spent lazing and sharing pastries with Nana. Now it was time to move on, since if Arena began looking for him, it was safer to be alone. The walk from town to town took 2 to 3 days, so he should have used a map. Iser hoped he was heading to Odin. The distance was small, but sometimes he had to ask passers-by for directions. In one day, he could get from one town to another by wagon, but that trip always made him seasick. The next morning, the young man decided he had reached the lands of Ardino, a town known across the region for its juicy fruits. Iser noticed a few small spirits circling the apple and offering him a taste. He appreciated their kindness, though from the outside, it might have looked like he was stealing. Just as that thought passed through his mind, a loud rumble came from behind, and he jumped on the spot. A ravenous giant boar attacked the garden, and the gardener immediately called for someone to fetch a daring adventurer. The shots drew the boar's attention, and the angry animal charged the man. The boar stamped its hooves menacingly and charged toward the frightened man. The men fled, but the enraged boar charged after them, attacking with renewed ferocity. At once, Jia Yun grabbed his bow from behind his back and fired an arrow that pierced the boar's leg. The boar will ignore his arrow and charge at the hero while I fire a second arrow. An arrow strikes the creature's head, and it gives a piercing scream. The animal fell to the ground, and everyone around immediately became worried about Adele's condition. He killed the animal to save the man, and if things turn out that way, its death will be in vain. So the boy, not wanting the meat and other parts to go to waste, picked up his hat that had fallen to the ground. He told the men he planned to butcher the carcass and store the meat in the fridge, and asked them to show where the watering holes are. He would also appreciate their help carrying the boat. At day's end, the man decided to thank his rescuer and asked to share his food with him. A spread of tempting dishes stood before the hero, with the juicy boar meat catching the eye and greatly impressing the guide. He could not hide his pleasure that the meat would not go to waste and licked his lips. The guide wanted to talk to the hero about the hide. The map shows that the village of Palna once stood here. Between this spot and Fulka on the riverbank was Lake Zaire. All this water was used for laundry, cleaning hides, and general washing, so the hero could leave it here. Even with hard work, tanning the skins could take several months, and Iso knew that was very long, and that he could, in principle, wait. But remembering the heir, he realized he could not allow such a long delay. The man took care of all his affairs and announced he would leave tomorrow. He admitted this might not be what Iso wanted to hear, but assured him he could stay as long as he needed, since he had rescued him and felt grateful. He admitted he was in a bit of a hurry, but the man invited him to stay at least one more day. Deciding it was wiser to go unnoticed, he left while he still could. He warmly thanked the people who had sheltered him for the night, offering them a genuine smile. In Palna, the hero handed the boar hide to the local tanner. Iser watched with interest, trying to see how they treated it, but time was short, and they had to hurry on their way. He decided to pick it up the next time he came back. On the road, Iso came across a group of people resting by a campfire who had settled to sleep outdoors. That day, the boy reached Lake Flake's Air, and he was breathless at the sight of a vast stretch of water reaching to the horizon as if it had no end. Sha'ir was considered part of the Republic of Sha'ir and lay just beyond Fokker. When Iser reached the fishermen, they warned him the wind would soon blow his hat off. The boat trip from Galka to Luron lasted the whole day, from early morning until evening. This was necessary, so the workers would act in unison. The approach also drew aggressive monsters toward the ship's stern, protecting its other parts. That was the main idea. As the hero rowed, his companions kept a steady beat on a drum, and the unusual scene filled him with sincere admiration. It was probably the wide-open space, but the van trip felt twice as light and even more pleasant. People said Loran was very similar to Fokker. Both towns were created as mirror images on opposite sides of the lake, or something like that. That night, he was still in Lourant, hoping to reach Odin soon. In the end, I felt everything was moving too fast. If he hadn't stayed so long at the championship, he would have had more time to explore those cities, but he had no regrets. Smiling, he remembered the incredible journey that had brought him to this point. It was a land of magic, and somewhere beyond the distant horizon, his longed-for destination awaited him. The hero reached one of the Lorons as evening fell over the city. The city streets were crowded, and it seemed his first duty would be a visit to a government office. He apologized to the young lady for disturbing them so late, but the older woman only smiled kindly and assured them it was nothing. To become a mage, the first step is to have your magic tested at a government office. The hero smiled faintly, knowing there was still plenty of time before dawn. At last, he reached the Odin State Institution. Magic there was a complex process, with inner magical power and mana converted into energy by special techniques and spells to get the needed result. Had he failed this exam, he would not have been able to study magic at Odin. He thought about what he would do next if he failed the exam again. It's a little late to say, but his boundless optimism brought him this far. Mastering magic required not only a sufficient reserve of mana in his body, but also an innate gift for controlling it. Unexpectedly, the girl summoned an 8 from the aces. This world held many wonders, but he could learn only magic. They led the hero into a room where a strange, rather comical-looking uncle was already waiting at the table. The hero turned to the man. Something felt wrong, but the old man smiled kindly and invited him to sit. Surprised, he said he had never seen elves among the participants in this trial and apologized for his confusion. The man laughed and admitted he'd seen the domes here several times. The protagonist studied him closely and asked him to clarify what he meant. The dwarves have now gone through this test more than a dozen times, all to create magical gear. Forbes wanted to learn magic so he could enchant the items he made in his smithy. Isaac pictured a magical sword. thought it was a great idea and immediately wanted to create such an artifact. But the man noticed that only 2 people had ever passed this trial, and that was a long time ago. Having magical gear is not enough. You must also know how to use it. Magic needs personal ability, so Ace finally realized he could not rely on items alone, and that a mage's skills and strength matter. Opening the chest, the hero began examining the tools and testing them, delighted because he had never come across such unusual materials before. He took one piece in each hand and gently joined their ends. Pleased, the hero tried the same, and to his surprise, light appeared on the tips of the sticks. The man smiled and said it was truly wonderful. He said his abilities were simply incredible, and the hero was immensely happy about it. Iser also wanted to buy the same sticks, but the man said that was unlikely. The hero decided to learn magic here, and a man asked if he could explain the different options. The first option was the Military Academy of Magic, where magic was taught for military use. Admission required citizenship of the Eastern United Union, so the young man realized it was not an option and had no intention of joining the army. The second option was the Adventure Academy, which taught monster fighting and basic magic for self-defense. But graduates had to serve 3 years with the United League, so the hero realized this path was not for him. The next option was the Academy of Basic Magic. As the name suggests, it teaches the basic principles of magic. Iser soon realized this place wasn't for him either. The fourth option was to learn magic from a real mage. The hero's eyes lit up with excitement, but for some reason, the man hesitated and looked unsure. Magic no longer depended on combining powers by talking with a spirit. The man was sure that if he really dared to teach magic, Andy would immediately reject the idea. This place is for learning magic. If you run into trouble, ask me and I will help. I officially welcome you to our city, Iser. A week passed after the trial. The hero visited many mages, hoping one would agree to take him as an apprentice. One of the mages met him with cold hostility and repeatedly refused his request. He had asked many times to be taken as an apprentice. Remembering his previous mentors, Iser knew there was no trace of hostility in their hearts. Still, he admitted he had to face jealousy and refusals. After losing motivation, he focused all his energy on work at the forge. For the past 3 weeks, he spent his days making various weapons and armor. The master gnome probably foresaw this. Iser remembered working with him. Iser recalls the master talking about his wish to master the craft of blacksmithing and magic, and the gnome thought his ability to speak with spirits already counted as magic. Smithing helped him keep his skill. The hero hesitated, thinking about simply gritting his teeth and joining the Academy of Basic Magic, but that felt too simple. As he weighed this, a man approached, apologized for the uninvited interruption, and told him important news about today's delivery. While the men were talking about ordering 3 more swords and arrowheads, a third figure appeared behind the speaker and immediately caught Ace's attention. The young man, taller than the others, studied the elf closely. The young man wanted to be sure the person before him was really the elven smith named Iser. Confused, he still confirmed that this was indeed the same elven smith, Iser. The young man dropped to his knees before the elf and earnestly asked to be taken on as an apprentice. Iser was completely surprised. He was about to walk away, but the boy grabbed his hands and begged him to stop. Falling at the hero's feet, he refused to let him go until the hero agreed to take him as a student. Finally, Iser agreed to listen to him so he would leave her alone. Rumors spread through town that the tireless Iser had taken on a new pupil. The heroes sat on wooden crates, and Iser relaxed a little. The young man said his name was Kaushman Fiddle. He was a mage with his own workshop and Iser was genuinely surprised that someone so young had managed that. Iser couldn't understand why the experienced mage suddenly decided to take up blacksmithing. Determined to forge a magical sword, he found the idea unusually thrilling. A few years earlier, Kaushman had already been an apprentice. His mentor was the powerful mage Rendel, a dwarf rarely seen in Odin. He had a workshop in the city where he could work with his tools, create magical artifacts, and test new equipment. Inspired by his example, Kaushman began studying magical equipment to master the art of sorcery. A few years later, he left the city. At the same time, Ridal was ordered to return to the dwarf kingdom. Kaushman has mastered the basics of magic. At the end of his training, his mentor reminded him that he must now rely only on himself to keep developing. Despite becoming a full-fledged mage under Odin, he had only used basic tools while studying magical gear and knew nothing about blacksmithing. Finally, the hero understood why they were looking for him, yet he still did not know why it had to be that person. Iser believed the blacksmith's craft could be learned anywhere, and that was exactly the point. When the hero first saw that sword in the shop, he knew he had to learn from Iser and no one else. Convinced a master from the gnome kingdom would visit the town, the young man went at once to the blacksmith's guild to see for himself, asked the masters about the sword, and learned it was the work of Master I. He could hardly believe that an elf had made the sword, but the guildmaster explained the elf had worked under a dwarf's supervision and with his permission. On hearing this, Kaushman arrived at once. Meanwhile, the hero's only concern was how his personal data could have become known to outsiders. Kaushman begged the hero and swore he would do anything the hero wanted. Kaushman sincerely hoped Iser would share his skills with him. The hero felt nervous again about asking to become an apprentice, even though he usually got his way, and deep down he wanted to back down. He didn't even realize he was doing the same thing, and he should have at least listened to the warnings. He decided to make sure Kaushman was truly willing to do whatever it took. Laughing, he turned to the boy and offered to teach him blacksmithing if the boy would teach him magic, since Iser also dreamed of forging a magic sword. Filled with excitement, he gladly accepted the offer. The meeting with Kaushman might have been a whim of fate, but frankly, the protagonist was annoyed that it happened to him. He led the hero to his workshop and invited him to go inside first. Apologizing for the unexpected visit, he stepped inside and was immediately taken by the place. The workshop looked like the forge of a master weaponsmith with no rival. Kaushman smiled and said he would light the forge now. When asked what he wanted and what he dreamed of, Kaushman smiled and honestly said he would accept any task. He longed to hear the ringing of iron being hammered again. Iser noticed that Kaushman was genuinely attached to his gnome master, but he was sure his own loyalty was even stronger. They planned to forge a magic sword. The hero began with a simple weapon. Iser was a blacksmith and Kaushman a mage. When they argued, they settled it by playing rock, paper, scissors. The boy smiled, remembering his teacher had done the same. Both looked like birds that could not fly the same way. Working together, they could reach their goal and create a magic sword. And when that need ended, Iser was sure he would gladly call Kaushman his friend. In the morning, the boys began their magic lessons. First, they had to learn to control the mana in their own bodies. Kaushman asked Ice to try to draw out his mana without any magical artifacts, and slowly focus all the energy on his fingertips. He tried to do it, and to Kaushman's surprise, he succeeded on his first attempt. Ashman had no idea how hard this challenge was for humans, but elves were a different matter. It was likely he did not realize he was dealing with a high elf. Kaushman smiled and admitted it did sometimes save them, so it was worth moving on and mastering the next technique. Language also influenced his mana and was part of the magical formula. Willpower and certain patterns together opened the path to magic. They only had to find out how these formulas affect mana, carefully study all known laws that govern it, and combine them to cast the spell. Magic came from the work of countless generations of wizards. The hero was amazed to see a huge pile of magical books before him. Now, everything clicked into place. From the wizard's point of view, borrowing the spirit's power as the elves do seemed not quite fair. He had never thought about it before. Prach explained it was like calling a bird's ability to fly or a dragon's ability to breathe fire wrong. It was absurd. He saw no point in the envy the hero tried to force on him. If he wanted and could learn magic, he had the same right to it as everyone else. Those words struck deep into the hearts of the hero and Iser. A spark of excitement lit Eshman's eyes. He decided they would start forging after lunch and was curious which item the hero had forged first. The hero thought they were nails, which greatly surprised the master blacksmith. From then on, they learned the secrets of magic and blacksmithing together every day. The heroes spent a long time discussing what the perfect shape of the magic sword should be, and during a break, they dreamed like children. Their sincere, innocent conversations went on longer and longer. While the hero ate a snack, he read books, and Koshinment offered to bring him an illustrated fairy tale. He realized they were just ordinary guys after all. The boys were thrilled by the idea of an incredible, fantastical weapon, and Iser was sure it had to be the sharpest in the world, adding that it would be even better if it could also shoot fire. For some time, the hero had lived alone. One day, he received a package with a letter. Inside was nothing but the skin of a greedy boy. The message came from Eren and was addressed to Nobel Ice Cream. Ludri's family executed every aristocrat who opposed the elves, but they said those nobles acted on their own, not for the state, so no official apology was offered to the elves. The hero had expected this, and within 3 to 5 years, the Ludria forest would become a refuge for many fleeing monsters. The decision was final. No elf who left Ludria would return until they got an official apology. An apology from the royal family would likely take a very long time. Gled feared it would be more than 10 years before he could speak with Master Kina again. Kaushman offered the hero a cup of tea. Regarding Ai's other questions, an elf among those present held a human child. No one knew if the child could speak with spirits when he grew up. The village elder hoped Iser would agree to take the child into his care. Realizing that half-blood elves live half as long as full-blood elves, and that elves usually raise children as a community, he felt that their wish for him to watch a child grow up so quickly would be cruel. He had insisted the half-blood child not be returned to its homeland. And now he had to take full responsibility for his words. Not sure he had the strength and tenderness to raise the child with the love she deserved. It was a deep emotional shock for Ace. If a boy is born, they'll catch bugs together and fish quietly. And if a girl is born, he will love her endlessly. It is not necessary for a child to speak with spirits. It is normal for a child to be reserved around a friend's parents. Life offers many paths: blacksmithing, swordsmanship, magic, and many others. If the child chooses a new path, they can look ahead together as one. Even if he was fated to outlive the child, or if the child died before him, he would still give the child his love. Many called him a selfish, overconfident elf with pointed ears. That made him certain he deserved to be the child's guardian and best friend. In his reply, Iser wrote that he was looking forward to the child's arrival, even though it was still far off. In his first year, Iser practiced meditation with Kaushman. During one of those sessions, he had an unexpected idea. These tools were unusual. To use them, you had to fill them with magic. It was assumed anyone who used them already knew magic. Even Poshman said ordinary magic was much faster. Usually that's true, but if he were attacked by surprise, it would be better to use magical artifacts. If their spell boosted speed, Rosian might be left completely defenseless. A magical artifact that activates instantly is much more reliable, and an item like that can truly save a life. Creating artifacts that do only one job made magical tools simpler and more practical. These items are better designed for single use and become much more valuable. I honestly didn't know. In any case, it's unclear whether this tool will ever be needed or whether it will work if we decide to use it. It seemed like a good idea, so the mentor suggested the hero try to make it happen. A short metal rod was best for this, so Couchman suggested starting small. Both were eager. To improve efficiency, they spent a lot of time researching and working. A year passed, and their study of magic was not difficult. A mage's power was measured by the number of spells they could use, so training came down to simple memorization. The hero had a very good memory, especially for things that really interested him, and it didn't matter how often people called him stupid or worse. In 3 years, a lot happened in the boys' lives. Draksha's army launched a large offensive in the United Alliance's north and took northern Zaire. As a result, the Kingdom of North Zaire asked the Exiled Alliance for support. Students from the Military Magic Academy were sent to the scene. One who had brought a magic staff used it to save many lives. Enemy cavalry attacked the camp at night without warning. The student panicked, but still managed to activate the protective barrier. The mage survived the surprise attack, but the army's battle mages were stunned. Their small defensive detachment immediately drew a lot of attention. Once the military mages recognized its value, they began to use the invention constantly. By then, Couchman was the only researcher in all of Odin specializing in magical artifacts. He wrote to Couchman that several people had asked him to teach how to make magical artifacts, and he was almost sure Couchman would agree. But to his surprise, Couchman refused. He believed that seeing his student grow up would turn him into a true mage. Couchman immediately objected. That was his first mistake, and the second was coming here to study magical artifacts and swords. Iser understood that Couchman also had to publish his research. He became a recluse. No one else could probe magical artifacts and their uses so deeply. Military leaders had to force him to publish his findings. Couchman told a friend he did not care about copyrights or any privileges. The hero noted that once he hands over Rauda, they can move on to making the magic sword. Couchman will cast the spell, and Iser will engrave it on the blade. The sooner it is ready, the sooner they can finish the task. He is clearly upset, but agrees with the main character. He promised to get everything done as quickly as possible, so Iser would have enough time to prepare to make swords. But Iser could not sit still from impatience, and the boys even started a small fight, trading punches. The hero had to leave for 2 years to care for a half-blood elf, but he was confident that by then he and Couchman would have shared all their skills and finished training each other. 2 years from now, they will leave this place holding the magical swords they forged themselves. This will require their full commitment and the use of all their combined skills. First, they had to build a prototype, so Iser asked Couchman to publish the results of his work as soon as possible. They worked day and night without rest until they collapsed from exhaustion. They worked until they were soaked in sweat. While the Couchmans tended their affairs and books, the hero kept practicing with his sword. The 4th year has arrived, and the guys have finally reached their goal. Excitedly inspecting the weapon, the boys said they had forged an actual magic sword. They first decided the most important thing was to test the blade's strength. I was more eager to test its magical properties. I was bursting with impatience, so I asked Coachman to direct his magic into the sword. He agreed and set to work. Their sword glowed with a magical light that captivated the boys. At last, the true reason for their meeting came to light, and the magic sword was fully forged. Smiling, the hero thought about the fate that might have brought them together. Clutching the sword, the hero could not hold back tears. His eyes filled with tears, and his whole body shook from a surge of emotion. Holding this sword and feeling its power was his dream, but Kaushman would not let him keep it long. At last, it was time to make his own magic sword. As always, he spent days working and thinking by the stove. By the 5th year, the time of trials had come, and the martial arts exam began. A voice from the group asked if he was really ready for this. He was seeking a mage certificate and told everyone he was ready for the trial. Koshman had raised the bar too high with his achievements and magic swords. If he did not become officially recognized as a mage, it would effectively close the door for younger wizards. Odin's chief mages nearly begged him to take the exam. But neither Koshman nor the hero cared about rank, honor, or other formalities. Use fire magic and a fireball to destroy the target stone. In this world, there are always people willing to do anything to clear obstacles from their path. Kaushman was one of them, until he became an official mage. The hero was forced to make him one of the mages. He thanked Kaushman for everything he had done for him. Kaushman's students successfully passed the ladder exam and sincerely thanked the examiner. We return to the forge. Kaushman asks Iser how it went. Smiling, he said he now admired not only the elven smith, but also a mage named Iser. Kaushman warmly congratulated the hero and thanked him for his support. The hero realized he now had to set out for the half-blood child, and Iser nodded to confirm his suspicion. 5 years had passed since he began learning magic, and his magic sword was finally finished. It was time for him and Kaushman to go their separate ways, as both had worked tirelessly to create their swords. He admitted he had never been especially fond of children, but he wanted to see what a child raised under their watchful eyes would become. The heroes noticed the children were too noisy for him, and Kaushman agreed. Ace was genuinely curious if he would ever teach someone else his knowledge and skills. For 5 years, he never showed the slightest interest in romance. All his energy went into research, and only one student studied under him the whole time. Isak decided that even if knowledge and skills did not stay with him forever, the abilities he developed himself would. And there was something especially appealing about that. The hero did not realize how strange it was. He examined his sword closely, a weapon perfectly suited to him. Its thin blade made the magic sword very hard to forge. The hero was sure Master Gnome would want to split it in two if he saw it. Imbue this blade with magic, and even a hammer blow will not leave a scratch. It will not break or dull, and an engraved spell makes it even stronger and sharper. When the hero's sheaths were forged from elven silver, they drew magic just by being near it. The sword became an enchanted weapon. Ice told the blacksmith he was wrong. Silver could draw magic from a single touch. Just hanging his sword in its sheath at his waist filled the weapon with energy. As they had warned, he had to be ready for the unexpected. Only the sword's blacksmith truly understood the value of Iso-san's enchanted blade. Yet Kaushman's magical sword was clearly the more powerful of the two, though its uses were very limited. Wielding a flaming sword, the hero suggested Kaushman take an ice blade, because the combination would look striking. Kaushman liked the idea too. He was both Ace's rival and his mental double, but their paths split, and their magical swords were completely different. The hero was led to the edge of town and said he would stay here. Everyone said goodbye and Kaushman waved to the hero one last time. That half-blood child will likely want to become a wizard someday. Then Iser may return here with him. By the time it happens, the Lukrovka may already be mature, or it may have grown old. With the spirits, the hero gazes dreamily at the sky, determined to reveal the amazing creation of a brand new magical sword he would forge by then. The young man was sure it would be a real breakthrough. At the arena in the city of Zanes, the boy started checking his map to figure out the local geography. I had just mastered magic, and it was surprisingly exciting. In Galrat, the nobility fell because of elf intrigues, and power shifted to the royal family. It was said the number of demons in the country kept growing. Only guesses could be made about what would come next. The Republic of Vilestrike was known for its tasty fish, and Ludria for its fine pottery. Worried he might not reach the capital Zane in time, he also remembered the tall elf's children. He wondered what the meeting would be like. The hero stopped at an inn in Swiz, the capital of Zanji. The young man immediately noticed the very soft beds, and then someone knocked at the door. Greeting the hero, he politely apologized for appearing uninvited. Gerda smiled warmly at Mr. Ace, noticing how much time had passed since their last meeting and remembering that this was the last time they had seen each other. And Iser also remarked that Gerda now looked much better than before. The Ludrians were already seated at the negotiation table, so they were almost ready to apologize to the elves. The hero motioned for Aaron to sit beside him, and the girl sat down beside him too. In the eastern part of the country where the tragedy struck, many people fled their homes in fear. Food supplies ran out quickly, and the harvests were poor. They even lost their reserves of leather goods, and the whole country fell into severe hardship. No one wanted to go near that land anymore. When exports stopped, countries stopped relying on outside supplies and focused more on their own interests. The kings now believed it was the right time to go on the offensive. He figured the royal families would act quickly while they still had time to recover. Although it was a bit early, he still felt grateful to her because without the night air strike, he could not have achieved this result. With a smile, she admitted she had only imitated Master Iser and followed her heart. She needed Kleis and Martina and did not want the country where her loved ones lived to fall into ruin. The hero only smiled, remembering all the acquaintances left in that kingdom. Many questions remained in the night cities and among the forest elves, but the hero never doubted that the arena would handle everything on its own. Undoubtedly, she was a true heroine. He realized his worries were pointless. There was no reason to be concerned. Meanwhile, the hero asked where the little elf was, and Aaron said he was here. From her words, the young man decided it was a boy. Would he be happy if the girl warned him that he is dozing right now? He asked Janya to let him know when she woke, then sat down again. The boy decided he could wait, and Aaron wanted to clarify something. She could easily have asked that if she wanted to. That is why it was so important to half-elves, since they had less time than others. They valued it most when someone opened up to them. She feared that this would break Master Iso's heart. I wondered whether she cared about his feelings or was comparing me to him. She worried about how long she'd live after he died, so she kept reminders of him close because she was afraid of losing him. The hero never thought that far ahead, but he noticed she was likely to live much less than he would. If things like that were enough to scare him, he wouldn't be able to talk to anyone anymore, and he didn't want that life. Friends from a past life once told him words that had long been more than food for thought and had become a tiny grain of regret. He could barely remember his former self or them, but those phrases stayed fixed in his memory. Seeing the spirit fly over their heads, the hero realized the child was already gone. Smiling, he rose into the air and said he was leaving now. The hero thought of humans, dwarves, and half-elves. They did not want to stand aside despite different lifespans. Even if his life on Earth will be long and his spirit may live even longer, he now wants to choose a path without regret and live it fully. Seeing the child wake, he instinctively put his hand to his heart because she looked so sweet. Surprised, he looked at the boy, and the hero realized the little one still had no name, so he simply greeted him. She looked the hero in the eyes and admitted it was truly beautiful. The talk was about the immortality of a high elf's soul, and a small hand reached up to Ace's face. He remembered how Metarina had once described high elves exactly like that, and smiled, thinking the child was very perceptive. He had a unique ability that only elves possessed. If the hero could summon spirits to help, his path would become much easier, and he would always have a loyal companion at his side. To an outsider, the scene looked odd. The child reached for Ace's cheeks, while the boy gently stroked the half-elf's head, and somehow it filled them both with genuine joy. The letter said he was born in winter, and the baby had not been named yet. The boy thought it was not so bad. Holding the baby, he announced he would call him that from now on. He called him by name and said that the elder forest elves also called him Maple. Today, he was not just his guardian, but also a true friend. Asked if he minded being offered wine, shyly lowering his head, he heard the hero say it was a great honor to meet him. Touching the boy's face, Anansi said in a warm voice that he was happy to see him and gently lifted the child into his arms, filled with genuine joy at being able to care for him. He said with delight that he was overjoyed at his birth, and above all, glad to be by his side. The hero gently put the baby back and paused, confused and unsure how to proceed. The hero thought it was too dangerous to leave without a clear plan, and if Aaron found out, he would certainly have to listen to a long lecture. Arena did not want to just feed him with a spoon, but they would still have to work. Iser thought it would help to show Vin how an adult behaves at work. The only question was, who would stay with him during that time? Emma was clearly the best. She was a force of nature in Rudria, and Iser only stood down after the king apologized, bringing peace to the country. Known not only for his reliability, he also worked secretly as a spy in the city. Odina was clearly not a suitable choice. He would only teach Vin bad tricks and had openly admitted he did not like children. Surprised, she couldn't believe they were already making plans. There was nothing wrong with what she said. They really had the freedom to act almost any way they wanted, and they could assess a situation and respond immediately. The hero was growing up too. When asked when they would leave, the hero said it would be tomorrow around noon. The hero finally decided to take wine on the road and said goodbye to Aaron. They walked the evening streets, shared nights, and savored ripe, sweet fruit. They took the child into guardianship for several reasons. In the end, the hero gave up his victory to greet the girl. She was delighted with him, said she was glad to have met Win, and asked him to share anything while they were still together. I desperately wanted to hug and pet Vin, and I said I was completely fine with it. The hero looked for someone to care for Finn while he worked. That's why he came to town. Only someone he truly trusted would do, and he remembered her. He promised to pay her well if she agreed. They planned to stay in the city for a year or even 2. She accepted his offer with enthusiasm, promised to handle everything herself, assured him her mother would surely agree, and was thrilled that Isak still remembered her. She invited the child to stay at her house. Great for the hero. It seemed the wind had not yet made sense of everything, but Isak was sure he would get used to it over time. He hoped time would help him adjust to the new surroundings and suggested they work together to make it easier. He perked up, but grew very hungry and asked what was for dinner. She said she would make a pasta bake and thought it would be easy and comfortable for Vint to eat. The amazing dish was a revelation for Vint, and the apples he tasted there were simply incredible. He became obsessed with apples and thought more elves might appear if he served them apple dishes. Smiling, the hero explained that elves love fruit. The hero found her pie remarkably tasty. He liked both meat and vegetables, but fish was his favorite dish. I watched him with envy, sure he was incredibly happy, and waited impatiently for Ven to grow up a little. The hero wanted to travel to new places and taste delicious food. Confident Ven would enjoy it, he dreamed of sharing those trips with him. I couldn't look at him and smile warmly. He knew the child had little time left. A man walking by noticed the hero and came up to him. A member of the blacksmith's guild, he apologized for interrupting and asked the hero to visit later. A few years earlier, Iser had worked for him for only a few weeks, and about 6 years had passed since then. Relief warmed him when he saw he wasn't forgotten. The owner might even give him a task. Taking a break from work, he decided to enjoy some wine, planning to contact the union later, and in the meantime, try a tea he had never had here before. Much time had passed since then. A man wanted to entrust Occam with a specific task. For example, he was to repair the city guard's armor and would be paid according to the amount of work done. The second part of the assignment involved technical supervision. A sword I once used was displayed at the Blacksmiths' Association, and a man beamed with pride when he heard this. When one of the masters learned the hero had returned to town, he asked the hero to accompany him elsewhere. Not wanting to bother the hero, the master still had several important tasks to attend to. The third key moment was an audience with the king, who took a sincere interest in the elven blacksmith, and the monarch said the hero could choose anything he wished, including any wonder of the island. The first task was to repair the armor and thank the man for his work. The blacksmith agreed, saying that with those skills, the hero could earn a lot of money. However, if he turns down another job, they will no longer be able to keep him, and he promised that if things went wrong, he would be extremely grateful for their advice, saying it with a warm smile. The hero once worked in the forges. Proud to have had the chance to work with Iser, a blacksmith like himself, he escorted the young man to the fortress. Sometime later, the hero met again with the blacksmiths he had worked with before. Everyone was thrilled to see him after so long, and they greeted Ace warmly while he was very happy to be back. Each time the hero left for work with tears in his eyes because he constantly sulked and begged him to stay. The girl held the baby close and always wished him success in his work. Looking at the crying boy, he remembered that not long ago the child couldn't even speak. The girl gently soothed him and suggested they play together outside that evening. She suggested peeking through the small window above the well, where many of his friends were, and he immediately stopped crying and decided to go. He got on well with the other children and was nearing adulthood, and at that time Vin was playing with the town kids when one boy wanted to show something interesting and took him along. The boy put a cockroach under his nose while he was hiding behind the shed, and the girl did not like it at all. The scene was far from pleasant. She told him she wanted him to stay that way, then asked what he wanted to do now. I had planned to use my day off to go camping and do a little studying when something happened. Just outside town, an incredible view opened up. Teaching Vin to fight was still too early, so they postponed it until he grew older. Meanwhile, the boy learned other useful skills and explored the natural world. They decided to start with spiritism. Simply put, it lets them call on spirits for help. Spirits often came to their aid, and the hero was truly grateful. They were happy to help. The wind spirit was especially impatient, having long heard about the wine and eager to be called. Iser smiled and encouraged the boy to take his time. To gain more strength, many factors must be considered. Iser said they were far from that, and many more trials still lay ahead. Deciding it would be too hard to win alone, they asked the spirit for help. He accepted the gift happily and even began to show a bit of affection. He never learned to ask for anything for himself. Given his upbringing, that was probably inevitable. She decided he needed closer supervision, so Win became interested in talking with spirits because he thought it could help him. Seeking, not just accepting, is what truly matters in life. The emperor emptied a handful of leaves from the bag and quietly wished the wind spirit would whirl them back into the trees. Finally, the wind spirits heard the hero's request, and leaves began to whirl in the air. The wind was delighted, and the heroes asked it to try the same, and it turned out both the wind and the wind spirit wanted to play. He gradually introduced them to the art of communicating with spirits, sharing all he knew, and they learned the basics of counting with him. Though he looked like a 4-year-old, he was actually 7. When things were explained clearly and simply, the boy picked up the material, though not as fast. In time, he would no longer have to learn to use He learned very quickly, probably because caring Nana was always nearby, and she praised him warmly as he mastered new things with ease. Deciding to give the world a brilliant wine was hard for the hero, but he had no choice and had to pour his whole heart into it and try to atone for the past. Varna brought a plate of apples and asked how many there were. The boy answered 2 without hesitation. He felt surrounded by her love. A lot of time passed since then. Nada asked the hero if he had really never gone to church. Convinced he was sincerely grateful to be taught to read and write and to be helped in getting along with the other children, Nada handed the bedding to the boy and received support from Iser, who agreed with her. People saw the world through their own values rather than others' views. When he grows up, he will likely accept that. The church tested children who attended free classes for magical abilities. Those chosen as future priests were sent to the church's main temple, and the family received a reward. With no financial troubles, he had no reason to part with the wine. It took him 10 full years to age 1 year, and half-elves take about 2 or 3 years for the same. Unlike human children, Vitrilo will always look younger than his peers. Over time, this will become a problem he must face. Living as a half-elf felt very different to him than life as a human, because time among the high elves moved in its own way. The hero felt there were better places for wine than the ones they were in. There were many children here, not only in the church, but also in Iserturn and near Nano. He asked the girl to listen to his long story. It would have been easier to stay silent and let the tale pass. She was a traveler from a different people and already felt uneasy here. He was sure that if he hinted, she would not take another step, but he could not fool her. A tall elf and a half-elf, they fit together perfectly because of her. A year and a half later, Arena sent a letter. He could not finish reading, but the young man still took offense and said he was not going anywhere and wanted to stay with Nanda. Ortrud tried every argument, right and wrong, to persuade him, but he had already promised Irina he would go. And Isaat noticed Vinu really liked it here and explained that one must keep one's word and honor one's promises. They asked Vin to prepare a gift for Nano, thank her for everything and say goodbye. While on a walk, the hero asked Vin to use the spirit to find a very beautiful, rare stone. The boy needed very little time to complete the task. Everyone in the shelter watched with interest as the hero handled the rare stone skillfully. Once we finished packing the gift, Van and I agreed she'd definitely like it. The guys thanked Nana for her care and leadership, then gently nudged Vint toward the girl. Very nervous, he looked at Nana in confusion. Handing her a small box, he was a little embarrassed and said they had made it themselves just for her, and now he wanted to give her this gift. After getting his permission, she opened the gift and was pleasantly surprised. This was an authentic ornament from Parmagran 8. This gift symbolized their boundless friendship and selflessness. She said she hoped to say goodbye to him in person and share one more smile. The Hawaiian also cried, saying he did not want to leave her forever. The hero immediately lifted the boy into his arms. He screamed frantically, demanding they let him go and call Nana. The girl, devastated by pain, sank to her knees. Throughout the journey, he cried without stopping. It was tempting for him to back away, but the hero could not leave him alone in Jempamoni. She might have managed on her own, but lacked the hero's strength to protect Vin. Iser could no longer delay their departure and feared this farewell would be final. He did not want anyone to cry, did not want to cause her pain, and instead felt compassion for her. The only thing he really wanted was for their farewell to be more peaceful. Together, they go to Ludria, and he will help Irene while she fights monsters. He did not want a true hero to be in danger and would be very upset about that. Feeling the passage of time, Ludria was the perfect place for him because life always buzzed there, with countless people and other life besides. This did not mean they would never see all those people again or never come back here. The hero smiled and told them to cry as long as they needed, then sleep peacefully. The boy told Vin he could let the tears come if he needed to. In Laudria, new friends would be waiting for him, and Iso assured Vin he would always be by his side. The hero could not tell if he was crying from joy or anger, but in any case, both had been through many trials together. Tears in his eyes, he longed to grow up as quickly as possible and become a true adult. Swept by the wind, he reached the kingdom of Ludoria, but still could not calm down. An earthquake made passage through the eastern part of the city difficult, and the hero felt the curious stares of those around him. One of the shopkeepers suddenly shouted that this was the traveling elf. Everyone assumed the hero had turned back. At first, Iser did not recognize the stranger, but then he remembered that this was the man who had once forged a new knife for him. The man smiled warmly, admitted much time had passed, and added that he had heard many rumors about Iser. Assuming the young man was heading to the Keihai dojo, he offered to give him something free of charge. I thanked the seller for the generous gift, a large portion of meat, and the seller told the merchant that he planned to stay in the capital and that if he needed a new knife, he could turn to him. This drew his attention, and he asked the hero what the little wonder was. Smiling at the boy, the shopkeeper invited him to his shop, promising the best meat in the capital. After they said goodbye to the guys, the main characters hurried to the dojo. Just after climbing the stairs, the hero noticed many unfamiliar people gathered there. A few boys warned the elf and the child that this was the Asogi family dojo, and outsiders were not allowed here. Smiling, he said he was their friend and had come with good intentions. The embarrassed boy accepted the gift and thanked the stranger. A man's voice came from behind the group and said that this person mattered greatly to their dojo. Standing before everyone was the first student, the one who had once revived the dojo and later left it. I greeted the lead student with a warm smile, thinking he had come a little earlier than usual. Smiling to herself, she greeted Master Kihu and noted that not even 10 years had passed. Master Kiha noticed the small elf and asked who the child was. Lifting the elf into his arms, the boy explained he had found him, and they had become friends. The boy offered to introduce them, and Kiha smiled, saying he had not changed at all. She asked the two children, Mizuyu and Shizuki, to treat Vin like a younger brother, and they smiled and promised they would. Mother offered the children the room where he had slept and promised to feed them. The hero was genuinely happy and decided the two were Kigai's children. His mother smiled and said he had not changed at all. A few weeks had passed since the hero and Vin arrived at the dojo, and the boys were playing outside when one of them called to Isu. Good at caring for the children, he also kept a close eye on his mentor. Lately, the hero had spent most of his time looking for swords for Ki-Hai and playing with Vin and the other kids, so with all the attention on the little ones, they barely saw each other. And when the games wound down, he suggested the three kids play together without him. The apprentices began to fear the master because he was consumed by rage after his trump card was ignored. About a month has passed since the hero last took up a sword, so by now his ki should have become much stronger and more powerful. If the boy proves himself, she might finally stop blaming him. So he asked Master Kia to assess his swordsmanship. He had waited too long for this, and powerful feelings were already building inside him. He offered his opponent the real weapon he carried instead of a wooden sword, a magic sword forged by Master Blacksmith Couch. Though doubtful of his strength and convinced he could not yet unleash the sword's true power, the hero drew the blade from its sheath. After a few swings of his sword, he raised it above his head. Everyone noticed the tense, worried faces of Kea and the others nearby. Recovering from shock, the students showered him with praise. They expected the first student to perform that way, and it seemed he had not disappointed. But at that moment, someone called him through the keyhole. A strange grimace crossed her face, and the hero immediately felt something was wrong. She nodded quietly, not rushing to answer, and said it was much more complicated than it seemed. Before asking a lot of questions, she decided to share her assessment of his skills. She noticed that while traveling, he trained tirelessly, and his skill had improved significantly compared to before. Iser was sincerely grateful to her for that. Despite all the training, she felt he had never used the skills he learned, and she was right. One of the skills not meant for fighting turned out to be just for show. She learned that the hero's power did not come from the sword. She was sure he had easily shattered the opponent's sword with one calm, precise strike. This is no different from ordinary street shows by Kihis. He has no real combat experience. I wanted to tell him he was stuck on the same mistake as his mentor. At this rate, she doubted he could become a true swordmaster. Ace's main weakness, she decided, was his lack of real fighting spirit. She smiled softly and admitted the trait suited him well. He paused to think how to fix it, while Kia told the rest of the students to start sparring. Several weeks later, Iser ended up in northern Ludoria, near the border with the Foda Empire. They told the young man they would wait for his return and handed him a horse. Then Arena asked him to prevent a possible invasion by the Foda Empire. After a change of power and ongoing instability, the kingdom's military strength fell sharply. Even if their problems came from their own choices, occupation still could not be allowed. The hero did not want the negotiations to be in vain. Ludoria also had close ties with the elves. Besides, they didn't need new neighbors, and it was much easier to get along with people they already knew. Besides, living next to these people would bring the Ludorians many advantages, and they were moving confidently toward their goal. He briskly made his way along the path people had paved by hand to the goal. He called on the earth spirits living in the towering mountains and begged them to hear his call. To block this path, he was ready to bring down a boulder. He thought it would take decades to fix this road, and the kingdom would finally stop relying on the elves for help. He wondered if he could really stand up to the imperial soldiers, or if he would lack the nerve. Others might imagine themselves in that role, but he did not believe he could. Admiring the finesse of Kia's sword, he dreamed of wielding the blade as skillfully and nearly reached that level of mastery. Getting stronger was Ace's goal, but he lacked the motivation. It may sound arrogant, but he was sure of his own strength. He didn't mind being an amateur rather than a professional fencer, but he didn't rule out that his attitude might change sooner or later. On his way home, Aaron met the hero and sincerely praised him for a brilliantly completed task. The hero decided to tell Kahaka the news. Kahaka lowered her eyes and said it was typical of him. It made her sad that she would no longer be able to see how great a swordsman he could become. The hero was still a student at the main school and lived in Kesog, and he was making a sword to give the king at the fair. The look on Kiha's face kept Isi uneasy, so he decided he needed a break, a strong drink, and a good meal. A great idea is to go outside for fresh air with a glass of wine. While the young man tidied his desk, someone called him. The young man asked Shizuka what had happened, while the little boy was about to ask him for a favor. He asked Iser to take him to Viscor. He wondered why Shizuki was heading there, but then decided it was fine, since he had always wanted to be somewhere that served wine. He agreed, but warned the journey would be long, and they would have to travel on flutes, so before leaving, he asked Shizuki to first ask his grandmother or Kihaya for permission, otherwise they might think he had been kidnapped. Convinced his grandmother would not object, he decided to ask her permission. Having thanked the hero, Shizuki hurried to his grandmother to ask her permission. From the boy's words, it was clear that Kyo would probably refuse, and Isis smiled involuntarily. Permission came, and Isis' soul finally found peace. Finn grew very attached to Shizuka and Mizui and gladly agreed to join them. The hero caught 2 birds they planned to cook for breakfast and greatly impressed the children. Both enjoyed themselves because the kids chatted lively with each other the whole way. The court guard verified they were citizens and warmly welcomed them to Vista Court. Smiling, he remembered how that day they had walked through the gates with Aaron and Martin Cross. It had been 15 years since that gnome left this city. He immediately saw Iser lower his head and look worried. He touched the elf's cheeks, but Iser reassured him there was nothing to worry about, that he had been overwhelmed by memories, and the tears were from happiness. At that moment, Shizuki turned to Iser and urged him to look ahead. A little farther off, people were loudly shouting and calling for Iser. The hero admitted he was just remembering his first trip to this city. Roden smiled and said he never expected to return and was very glad he had. I cautiously asked about one matter, and the soldier smiled and said that after his promotion, he no longer does that. Rod and his companions, together with the boys from Vista's yard, greeted Ace, making the hero laugh genuinely. Iser went to Claius's house in Martini. An old woman opened the door when he knocked. She did not recognize him, so the boy gave his name at once. He asked if Clea or Martina were home because he had come to pick up the keys to his house. The woman did not understand him at first, but promised to ask the owner right away. She came out to them with a bundle on her head that turned out to contain a martini. Happy at the hero's return, the boy confessed she had become a real beauty. The girl smiled and said they had not seen each other for a long time, that he would probably need the house key, and warned that the house wasn't very clean, and that at least the bedroom needed tidying. She wanted the guys to stay only a short while, and Claius was due back any moment. Seeing the children behind the hero, she was surprised because she clearly had not heard anything from Aaron yet. The young man introduced her to the baby. Shizuki was the one he had been caring for in the capital. They returned almost immediately after arriving. The biggest surprise did not come when he saw the hero or the famous wines, but when his gaze landed on Shizuki. The most striking thing was that Claius was the father of Shizuki and Mizuki. The hero could not understand how this had happened. They had known each other, but he already had a family by then. Their relationship had been more like friendship than love. He was also sure that Keo would never dare to ruin someone's family life. He wanted to ask Kia who the father of her children was, but the conversation never happened. And though Shizuki may have known who his father was and come here on purpose, the protagonist could not understand why Kia let him leave. Questions kept coming, but I just sighed and decided I didn't care. No matter who Vienna's parents were, that would not make him treat them worse. That is why both Kia and her mother sincerely loved Mizuya and Shizuki with no doubts about their feelings. All three returned to Iser's house and went to bed. He realized he did not need to know everything because he would always be on the children's side. So he smiled and wished them good night. At breakfast, Kihaya's son, Shizuki, suddenly decided to challenge Rudria's top swordsman, Lord Cleas, called the Holy Sword. From Isis's expression, it was clear he was hearing the nickname Holy Sword for the first time. The hero frowned, set his cup of tea on the table, and agreed to a wooden sword fight after the meal. Suddenly, he understood why Suzuki had been so eager to come here. During a quick scuffle by the tents, Clay seized the moment and struck Suzuki hard in the stomach. After every blow, the young man asked for another match. Clay became a sword master by refined technique, not by strength. He was now about 40. During the match, Win turned to Suzuki and asked her not to give up and to clap for him. Suzuki grew into a true genius, thanks to his surroundings and his own talent. Even so, he was still far from class, the Holy Sword. The man again easily knocked the weapon from the boy's hands and won another clear victory. Each defeat irritated Suzuki more. Suzuki's move seemed to say there was more to come and pushed him to keep attacking. Suzuki might not have realized that for Clay, the sword duel was a way to connect with his father. It remains unclear how the adults reacted and what they really thought, though their response can be guessed. The hero checked that everyone except Shizuko. Zuko hadn't been planning anything or causing any mischief. No need to worry. The hero decides not to interfere because fate has already brought their paths together and they will meet sooner or later. To outsiders, their clash seemed inevitable, their paths bound to cross eventually. Clayas watched Shizuzuki with fear as blood ran from her nose. Certain he had landed a crushing blow on Shizuki, he watched Shizuki refuse to give up and keep fighting to find a way to win, and the hero recognized a true hunger for strength in him. He couldn't help it. Shizuki wiped his nose, pulled himself together, and asked for another duel. A month had passed since they visited the city, and Shizuki's sister was upset that only her brother went. She thought it was unfair. An enraged Mitsuhao attacked the hero without warning. He resolved to go with her next time. Meanwhile, Shizuki gave his parents souvenirs, and they thanked him sincerely. My mother noticed the area was rather noisy, but Mizuki was still a girl. It would have been understandable if they had gone for a few days, not for a whole month. I decided to apologize by forging a sword for them. He said he made the sword under Mizuki's pressure to win her forgiveness. They walked through a forest near the capital while the children played happily. The area once held many dangerous monsters, but now it was safe to walk. Aaron felt they all deserved a little joy after working hard together. The kids played happily nearby. Mizuki spotted a mysterious cave and asked Isahara what it was. She answered briefly that it was the den of a giant snake, so it was best not to go in. Mizuki asked whether a monster really lived there. Iser had no intention of defeating it. He said he did not like killing for no reason, even if it was a monster, unless they planned to eat it for lunch. The children were surprised because they had no idea snakes could be eaten. They didn't come here to hunt monsters, and Mizuki suggested they move on. Suzuki and Mizuki were the dojo master's children. Both had good manners and cared for others, but they were still very young. A caring mother and a gentle grandmother looked after them, but parental love was still missing. Suzuki tried to stand up to Klayasu to prove he was better, while Mizuo, like a real girl, threw a full-blown tantrum when they got home. She thought they both looked sweet and innocent. Vizua noticed Iser had stopped and called to him. They pressed deeper into the forest until they reached a huge tree whose size was so enormous the children stood frozen with amazement. The spirit tree appeared only to people who were near someone who could see spirits. Iser decided to show them the amazing tree. The hero knew that neither Mizu nor Northern could find this place, since it meant little to the elves. The boy smiled as he saw the tree had grown stronger and was clearly heavy with fruit. Noticing something odd, he pointed it out to Island. He pointed to a flower that bloomed out of season. Island smiled and said the tree spirit was probably very glad they came, then suggested the kids look for a tasty snack, and both agreed at once. Today, your menu included fried mushrooms and fire-roasted rabbit. Zui thanked Izu for the wonderful time together and said she had enjoyed it a lot. Flames flickered, and she wondered if she could become a skilled adventurer. She had no idea, but would have understood better if she had tasted a snake with the same scowl as that girl. Anger rose when he and the others pulled her cheeks and made fun of her. Mizuva was not yet 10 then, so she still had plenty of time to choose her own path. He couldn't hold back his laughter and apologized to the girl. It occurred to him that she might become an adventurer. He should get her weapons and armor again, like before. Days at the dojo passed slowly and felt the same. The boys watched closely as Vin grew, and he wanted to get stronger as fast as he could, and often complained to Isu. They trained together, and every evening, everyone gathered for dinner. 8 years have passed since they first stepped into this dojo. Irritated, Mizu and Shizuki walked up to the protagonist, and Isu assumed they had damaged the blade again. This time, he was wrong. Grandma called him, and Iser asked when she would have to fill in for him. Regretfully watching her light fade, he promised to handle everything himself. The hero thanked him and said goodbye to Mizue and Shizu. After 8 years, the twins were 15, and he gave each a sword. Still, the wine lagged far behind their development. No wonder he noticed how different he was from the other children in his development. Unable to change it, he gradually moved away from them. Despite everything, the hero truly appreciated how much time the twins spent with him. And when teenage troubles began, one day he told the hero to keep his distance. Glad to be back at the dojo, he politely asked permission to enter the room. Lately, his mother had been feeling unwell, and it was clear that age and illness were taking their toll. The young man said he had come at her request to speak with him. It was clear she didn't have much time left. Smiling, she said she wanted to talk to him. She also wants to apologize to him. After her husband's death, she felt her life would soon end and leave Keela alone. But at that moment, they were sharing ice cream. Only 2 women lived in the house, so at first she kept her distance. He soon became part of their lives. He healed her of the illness, ended the feud with Latrana, and restored their dojo. Because of him, her daughter became a skilled swordswoman, and he asked for nothing in return. The hero was completely content as a student. She became their guiding star on the path ahead. At first, he didn't believe it, but the woman begged him to trust her, insisting she wasn't exaggerating. The children they raised became new students and even defended the Dow Jones figures. She mastered fencing, though it was far from easy. She did all this so he could come back here one day. Wanting to become a mother, she asked a famous swordsman and his wife for an unusual favor. At last, the hero understood how everything had really happened in the past. He didn't know what to think and couldn't understand why they hadn't just refused her right away. Aaron, she left Cly's because their lifespans were different. That may be why Martin couldn't refuse them. They didn't understand why either, and maybe it happened because they couldn't say no to her daughter. They were probably just afraid to say no to her. In the end, they gave in to their daughter's wish. The hero had no idea what curse he might have brought upon her, and the woman just smiled mysteriously. The main secret was that Kyo loved him. This was a love that never faded with time. She wanted to pass her sword to her children for one purpose. He could come back here, and they'd be glad to see him. The woman was sure Kia would not want him to know all the details, but her mother did not want to take the secret to her grave. Back then, she had been furious and resentful toward him, but now she felt calm. She treated those children like a real mother, and they grew up to be decent people. And the hero returned to her with a sincere smile. She took the boy's hand. She did not ask him to keep the key for the rest of her life. Keeping her love in his heart was enough. He gave her his word. And only 5 days after that conversation, she died. No matter how much time you spend grieving those you've lost, it won't change anything, and they will remain only memories of the past. Years will pass before he gets that letter on the doorstep. The teacher's letter said he needed a clever assistant and asked him to drop by if he had the time, so it was no surprise that he paid attention to him. For the past few years, the hero had consistently won the swordsmithing contests, but that did not make him the best, because the true champion, a gnome who always beat everyone, had returned home. The arrival of a new gnomish king caused it. In their country, skill at forging iron directly determines your place in society. This time, a serious rival appeared on the horizon. Besides, though it sounded selfish, he sincerely hoped the gnome would keep the promise it had given him. To build a country where elves could live and play freely, the hero told Vin he would travel to the well-known country and ask that man in person what his plans were. He wanted him to stay, but the other was determined to leave with him. The hero was almost certain that without him, Iser would cause trouble. He was upset that the other thought him clumsy and made it his goal to watch his every move. The other insisted he go, so he agreed to the adventure. The dwarves got along well with others, so he hoped to find a friend among them. The hero decided to teach him how to talk to dwarves, since a long conversation awaited them. I told them to speak with Kia within 3 months and warn her that they are leaving tomorrow. She gave a sad smile, thinking this time she was saying goodbye to them forever, but the hero promised to return. Time moved at a different pace for him, but in her final moments, he truly wanted to be by her side. Only later did the hero realize many important things. He sincerely wanted to be by her side, and that was his response to her feelings. Death was not the end of everything he believed, because his new life began here. Having lived for many years as a high elf, she was likely still nearby. Eol smiled as he watched the little spirit float by and thought it a small miracle. Kiro knew the moment he first saw the end of the keek would stay in his memory for a long time. The girl smiled and said that in that case, it would be his promise. She admitted she would wait to meet him in his final moments, and he smiled, thinking his own face already showed signs of age while she still looked beautiful. Ro pushed through the snowy mountains and caught up with his mentor. The gnome was surprised that the elf had dared to follow him after all, because the gnome thought elves were faint-hearted. At first, it looked like he was just exercising, but that was also part of his training. And he noticed even the spirits here responded to his victory. The mountains were cooler than the forge, and the gnome carried all of Ace's things, smiling as he realized they were much lighter than iron. He told the boy not to fall asleep because another mountain lay ahead that they still had to cross. Usually elves and humans are forbidden from entering dwarf territory. Only those with permission from the gnome guide or holding a higher blacksmith's license issued by some major state were exceptions. The hero held 2 such passes. The hero asked the Smith's Guild for a dwarf guide, but got only vague promises. He spent some time with him at the bar. His mentor proved to be an extraordinary man, since he had lived in Ladlow for a while, and later received a letter from him asking for help. Cutting the hero's story short, he said he already understood. Though he kept drinking, his thoughts sank into the past, lost in memories. He just suggested having a drink and said that if the elves could manage the mountain trail, he would take them with him. He decided to warn the wine that he was leaving in 3 days, and it barely kept the nausea down from his sharp alcohol breath. That is how I, Iser, began my journey with a guide 2 weeks ago. The dwarven state lay underground. To humans, it seemed more like a city-state. According to the guide, tens of thousands of dwarves live here. The dwarf guards stopped the hero at the entrance, but when they learned who his mentor was, they immediately let him in. Iser was delighted by the familiar city. Here, unlike the mountains, a pleasant warmth settled in and immediately caught his attention. One of those walking with them noticed a swallow's nest nearby. The people around were very surprised by the elves' arrival, but then someone stepped in front of them and gave a stern order to stop. The dwarves could not understand who the strangers were or how the elves dared to enter their territory. One gnome from the squad pulled off his hood. No one could believe elves had appeared here. Meanwhile, the guard politely asked the gnomes to step back. Smiling at the thought of gnomes who thought themselves the best, he always preferred open, direct complaints to sly whispers behind his back. She poured wine on his head and ordered him to stay away. Approaching the gnome, he greeted and introduced himself, explaining he had come to this country at his mentor's invitation. If they do not like it, they could try to force him out. The blunt statement stunned the gnomes and left them confused. The dwarves shouted to Grandar, urging him not to yield to the newcomer. Noticing Iser's boldness, Grandar decided to show his strength and put the upstart in his place. It looked like he was about to lose control, and he clenched his fists in front of his face before sharply pushing Isafar away. If an elf had hands as thin as a radish, he would look helpless, like a startled bird. Yero's hands were rough and strong, like carrots, and he struck the gnome hard in the face. The gnome fell to the ground, and the man asked in surprise what had happened to him. He added that his teacher was even more powerful, and a strike from the teacher's fist could inflict severe pain. Then the man motioned for the gnome to stand and watched closely, unsure if this was truly a dwarf. He tossed his arm back proudly, and the gnome warned, "Do not underestimate me." Knowing it was only the beginning, he charged at the opponent. After the fight, the hero finally decided to talk to his mentor. Dirg admitted the student always surprises him with his actions. If the boy had announced himself before crossing the border, there would have been no problems. The hero probably guessed it. A gnome pressed a foul-smelling compress on the apprentice, who hated it, but it always worked. The teacher already understood what Iso wanted. After that battle, everyone realized he was the one who had invited the elves to these lands. Across the land, rumors are spreading about a mysterious elf who hit an elder right in the forehead. The mood turned tense, and at that moment, a woman entered the room and offered them tea. He noticed his wife looked young, and a dangerous boldness showed in her eyes. That made everyone laugh, and he sharply warned the young man not to try joking with him. They tried to make it clear that he had invited the elves. He knew they would try not to damage his reputation during this special time of year, and he was grateful to them for that. Varfas tried not to seem pitiful because he did not want anyone to think he could not care for even one student. He understood what was happening and apologized. Asvold was a man with a strong sense of dignity. Much time had passed, so the hero had forgotten what it was like to ask someone for help. He apologized for putting him in a tight spot, and the gnome replied to the student with a friendly smile. They patted the boy on the stomach and praised him, saying that whatever he did very well. Whoever defeats the dwarf miner will rightfully become the world's first high elf. Smiling, he said he was proud of their friendship and lightly patted the elf's shoulder. The elf cried out in pain, but was still glad to have met such a mentor. Hearing someone behind the door loudly shouting about wine, they decided to sneak a peek to find out what was happening. No girls stood near the city gates, but they found it hard to believe. A little boy pointed out that she did not even have a beard. The children argued heatedly. The hero was surprised to learn the Sval already had 4 children, and had not even guessed that baby Svals could grow beards. One of the Svals said he was already 20, about 10 by human standards. The first victorious fight turned out to be really exciting. Apparently, his teacher raised his children without bias toward elves. He felt proud and moved by how he had become braver, more determined, and even a little stubborn. Calling his pupil, he suggested getting to the point and briefly outlined the basics of the ice armor. One gnome rose above the rest among all the masters who competed. His name was Roger. Roger, trained by Kaushman, became famous as a student, a wizard, and an unrivaled blacksmith. Roger was not yet a master smith, but the hero did not understand what the dwarf meant. Roger reforged the mithril, a rare metal prized most by dwarves, and the emblem of royal power. It requires unimaginable heat to work, and only one furnace in the land can do it. That furnace is a secret relic only a true king may use. Some believed this furnace was fueled by a real fire burning at the earth's core. Elf legends said underground dwarf smiths stoked it. Guy wondered whether they would return. Gathering experienced dwarves and young, magically gifted craftsmen, he taught them to make enchanted tools. Thanks to those tools, he began working mithril without using the mysterious treasures. The hero learned of this quickly, and soon the conservative dwarves rebelled. Roger takes the throne. This could cause the country to favor people with a talent for magic. Magical artifacts are useful, but they cannot be used without a natural gift for sorcery. Meanwhile, the Dvari, known only for their smithing, grew increasingly annoyed. They all tried to work with mithril. Surprised, he looked at the teacher, suspecting he supported the old ways. Everyone agreed this technology is truly exciting. This time, he was determined to seize the throne because he had a strong reason not to back down. Create a country where elves could live freely and enjoy life. He wanted to show this to all the gnomes. In that country, no one knew what would happen when gnomes and elves joined forces. 2 of them were a gnome who began to wonder how many of his students were true friends. The hero regretted that the cowgirl wasn't there at that moment. It seemed the gnome guessed which magical artifact Roger had made. Koshman was probably already fighting Ace, watching the masters duel closely and thinking how his own teacher would have acted.